Adam Smith, the quiet man who explained the world documentary, to fall asleep, to in the soft glow of an imagined candle, in a world where time moves more slowly than our own. The story of Adam Smith begins not with markets or money, but with silence, a thoughtful silence. The kind that settles over a study late at night, when the city outside has gone to sleep, and only the scratching of a quill disturbs the air. Adam Smith was not a conqueror, not a king, not a man who commanded armies or ruled nations, and yet few individuals have shaped the modern world as deeply as he did, quietly, patiently, and almost accidentally. Adam Smith was born in 1723 in the small Scottish town of Kirkcaldy, a place shaped by the sea, trade, and routine. His father died before he was born, leaving Smith to be raised by his mother, Margaret Douglas, a woman of discipline and quiet strength. She would remain the central emotional anchor of his life, and he would live with her for most of his adult years, an arrangement that suited his temperament perfectly. Smith was absent-minded, gentle, and deeply introverted. He was known to forget where he was walking, to speak aloud to himself in public, and to lose track of time while thinking. As a child, Smith showed unusual intellectual promise. At 14, an age when most lives are barely beginning, he entered the University of Glasgow. There, he encountered the ideas that would shape his mind forever: moral philosophy, logic, rhetoric, and the emerging spirit of what we now call the Scottish Enlightenment. This was a time when thinkers believed that reason, observation, and calm discussion could improve society. Smith absorbed these ideas not as dogma, but as living questions. Later, at Oxford, Smith's experience was less inspiring. He found the teaching rigid and uninspired, and much of his real learning happened outside formal lectures, through reading and solitary thought. This contrast left a lasting impression. He began to believe that progress did not come from authority or imposed systems, but from freedom. Freedom to think, to exchange ideas, and eventually to trade. When Smith returned to Scotland, he became a professor of moral philosophy at Glasgow. His lectures were famous, not because they were theatrical, but because they were clear. Students described him as calm, methodical, and deeply humane. Smith did not see economics as a cold science of numbers. To him, it was inseparable from human behavior: sympathy, fairness, and trust. Long before he wrote about markets, he wrote about morality. In 1759, Adam Smith published The Theory of Moral Sentiments, a book that revealed his true foundation. Humans, he argued, are not driven solely by self-interest. They are driven by sympathy, the ability to imagine the feelings of others. Society functions because people care how they are seen, because they seek approval, and because they possess an internal moral compass. This idea is essential to understanding Smith, and it is often forgotten. Only later came the work for which he would become famous: an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, published in 1776. The timing was historic. Revolutions were stirring, old systems were cracking. And Smith offered not a manifesto, but an explanation. He observed that when individuals are free to pursue their own work, to specialize, and to exchange goods voluntarily, society as a whole becomes more productive. Wealth, he argued, was not gold stored in vaults, but the total output of labor and cooperation. Smith described how division of labor, one person focusing on one task, could dramatically increase efficiency. He used simple examples: a pin factory, a baker, a butcher. These were not abstractions. They were everyday scenes. Smith believed that ordinary life held the key to understanding large systems. Then came the phrase that would echo through centuries: the invisible hand. Smith did not mean that markets were magical or perfect. He meant that individuals, acting within rules of justice and competition, often unintentionally contribute to the greater good. It was an observation, not a moral command. Smith never argued that greed was virtuous. In fact, he warned repeatedly against merchants, monopolies, and concentrated power. As his fame grew, Smith did not seek influence. He declined political ambition. Instead, he accepted a modest post as a customs commissioner, a job enforcing the very trade rules he had analyzed so carefully. He lived simply, walked often, and spent his evenings in conversation with friends like David Hume. When Hume died, Smith was deeply shaken and courageously defended his friend's character against public criticism, an act that cost him reputation but preserved his integrity. In his final years, Smith ordered many of his unpublished manuscripts burned. He believed they were unfinished, unworthy, or unclear. This decision alone tells us much about him. He did not wish to be misunderstood. He valued clarity over fame, precision over legacy. Adam Smith died in 1790, quietly, in Edinburgh. There were no monuments at first, no great ceremonies, yet his ideas traveled far beyond his lifetime. They shaped modern economics, influenced governments, and became both celebrated and misused. Many who claim his authority have never read him carefully. Smith believed in markets, but also in morals, in freedom, but also in restraint, in self-interest, but always within a framework of justice and human sympathy. As the candle burns low and the world of Smith fades gently into darkness, one truth remains. He was not the prophet of greed, nor the architect of cold systems. He was a moral philosopher trying to understand how ordinary people, living ordinary lives, could create extraordinary outcomes together. And perhaps that is the most soothing thought of all, that beneath the noise of history, beneath empires and revolutions, the world is shaped quietly, by habits, by cooperation, and by people thinking carefully, late at night, by candlelight. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Close your eyes now and let the heavy curtains of the present day fall away, leaving only the mist and the memory of a rugged ghost. We drift backwards through the currents of time, past the roar of modern industry, past the clamor of the 19th century, settling gently onto the shores of the Firth of Forth in the year 1723. The air here is cool and thick with the scent of brine and burning coal. We find ourselves in Kirkcaldy, a Lungtown or Longtown, stretching like a ribbon along the Scottish coast, where the grey waves of the North Sea beat an eternal hypnotic rhythm against the land. It is a place of hard-working people, of nail-makers and salt pawners, where life is governed by the tides and the trade winds. But in a sturdy house near the harbour, the atmosphere is not one of bustle, but of a quiet, pervading grief intertwined with new life. Here the story of Adam Smith truly begins, shrouded in the peculiar melancholy of a child who arrives just after a departure. You see, the first historical truth of Adam Smith's life is an absence. His father, also named Adam Smith, a lawyer and a man of some standing, who served as a judge advocate and later as a comptroller of customs, passed away in January of that year, just months before his son drew his first breath. The senior Adam Smith left behind a young widow, Margaret Douglas, and a silence where a father's voice should have been. This timing is significant. Historians often debate how this posthumous birth shaped the boy's character, suggesting that the uniquely intense bond between Smith and his mother, a bond that would prevent him from ever marrying and keep him by her side until her death in extreme old age, was forged in this initial tragedy. Imagine the scene on the 5th of June, 1723. The church register records his baptism on this day, though his actual birth date remains a quiet mystery lost to the fog. As was common in those times, when record-keeping was as fluid as the sea, we can imagine Margaret, resilient and composed, holding the infant Adam in the draughty nave of the Kirkcaldy church. The stone is cold, the light filtering through the glass is pale, and outside the gulls cry out over the fishing boats. She is a Douglas, a name that carries the weight of Scottish nobility and history, and she possesses a stoicism that she will pass down to her son. She calls him Adam, preserving the name of the man she lost, ensuring that even as the father fades into memory, his identity is stamped onto the future. The baby is delicate, prone to sickness, a fragile thing in a harsh climate. For years, Margaret's life revolves around keeping this single, flickering candle lit. She watches him with a protective gaze that borders on the fierce. The town of Kirkcaldy itself becomes his first teacher. It is not a metropolis, but neither is it a backwater. It is a port, a place where goods enter and leave, where the very concept of exchange is visible in the crates of linen and the barrels of tobacco sitting on the wet cobblestones. But for now, Adam is just a boy in a cradle, listening to the wind rattle the sash windows, unaware that he will one day explain the movements of the world, unaware of the invisible hand, knowing only the visible tender hand of the mother who smooths his brow and keeps the night at bay. The years drift by like low clouds over the Scottish lowlands, and the infant in the cradle grows into a toddler, finding his footing in a world that feels both vast and intimate. We travel forward now to the year 1726, when Adam is just 3 years old, a time when the boundaries between the safety of the hearth and the wildness of the open road are dangerously thin. It is here that we encounter the single most dramatic episode of his youth, a story that balances on the precipice of legend and fact, whispered down through generations of biographers. The boy and his mother are visiting Strathonry, the estate of his uncle, located on the banks of the River Leven. It is a place of ancient trees and deepening shadows, far removed from the watchful eyes of the town. One afternoon, in a moment of lapse that every parent fears, the child is left alone on the front steps, perhaps watching a beetle crawl across the stone or listening to the wind in the pines. When the family returns, the steps are empty. The silence is sudden and terrifying. Panic ripples through the estate like a stone thrown into a still pond. It is discovered that a band of tinkers, traveling vagrants or gypsies, as they were called then, had passed through the area. A search party is hurriedly mounted, scouts riding out with hearts pounding against their ribs, scouring the wooded paths and the winding roads. Several miles away, deep in the Leslie Woods, they spot the group. In the confusion that follows, the woman carrying the child panics, sets him down, and flees into the undergrowth. The young Adam Smith is recovered, wailing but unharmed, returned to the arms of his mother. It is a strange cinematic vignette to consider as we drift towards sleep. The man who would one day codify the laws of sedentary commerce and civilized exchange was almost swept away into a life of nomadic wandering. Historians have long enjoyed the irony of this moment, noting with a gentle, dry humor that Adam Smith, with his chronic absent-mindedness and delicate constitution, would have made a terrible gypsy. We can imagine him years later, trying to sell a pot or a pan, but forgetting the price or getting lost in a theory about the metallurgy of the handle, much to the confusion of his customers. But the boy remains, and the road not taken fades into the mist. This brush with the wild serves only to anchor him more firmly to the quiet, orderly life of Kirkcaldy. As the shock of the kidnapping subsides, a new pattern emerges, one that will define his existence far more than any adventure. The child is sickly, often confined to the indoors, while other boys run roughshod through the muddy streets or dive into the cold waters of the Firth. Because his body is frail, his mind begins to build its own fortifications, its own vast kingdoms. He becomes a watcher. He observes the way the fishermen mend their nets, noting the rhythm of their hands. He watches the nail-makers in the town, a memory that will famously surface decades later in his writings on the division of labor. He is already gathering the raw materials of his philosophy, though he does not know it yet. It is during these formative years at the Burgh School of Kirkcaldy, regarded as one of the best in Scotland at the time, that his peculiar personality begins to crystallize. The schoolmaster, David Miller, is a man of learning, and under his tutelage, Adam falls in love with the classics. He translates Latin with a fervor that surprises his teachers, finding comfort in the structured beauty of ancient sentences. But along with this brilliance comes the legendary absence. This is not a lack of attention, but an excess of it, a focus so intense that the rest of the world simply ceases to exist. His schoolmates, likely with a mix of affection and amusement, watch as young Adam stands in the middle of a bustling playground, staring at nothing, his lips moving in a silent conversation with himself. He is known to smile at invisible companions, to gesture to the air, completely untethered from the present moment. Historians still debate the nature of these fits of abstraction. Was it a neurological quirk, a symptom of a hypochondriacal nature, or simply the sign of a brain that was constantly, relentlessly working? Whatever the cause, it creates a buffer around him. He is not bullied, for there is something disarming about his gentle nature. But he is solitary. He is the boy who forgets to wear his hat in the rain, the boy who walks into obstacles because his mind is walking through the streets of ancient Rome. Yet, there is a warmth to him. He is not cold or distant. He is simply elsewhere. We can picture him in the evenings, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows against the walls of his mother's house. Margaret Douglas sits nearby, perhaps sewing, her presence a constant, silent reassurance. The bond between them deepens in these quiet hours. She nurses him through his frequent illnesses, tolerating his eccentricities with a patience that only a mother can summon. She understands, perhaps before anyone else, that her son is destined for a life of the mind. In this safe harbor, Adam devours books. He reads the histories of Greece and Rome, absorbing the stories of stoic virtue and civic duty. He is particularly drawn to the Stoics, those ancient philosophers who taught that one must master one's own reactions to the world. It is a lesson that resonates with the sensitive, sickly boy. If he cannot conquer the physical world with strength, he will conquer his inner world with reason. The heavy, leather-bound volumes smell of dust and glue, a scent that will become the perfume of his life. Outside his window, the town of Kirkcaldy continues its daily grind. The ships come in from the Baltic and the Netherlands, bringing strange goods and news of a wider world. The local merchants complain about tariffs and taxes, their voices drifting up from the street. Adam hears them. He hears the friction of commerce, the complaints of the oppressed, the logic of the marketplace. He does not judge them yet. He merely files the sounds away. He is a recording instrument, delicate and precise. As he nears the age of 14, the small world of Kirkcaldy begins to feel too tight, like a coat he has outgrown. The kidnapping had failed to take him away, but now, the gentle pull of intellect begins to do what the gypsies could not. It calls him west, toward the crime and the glory of the city. We can see him standing on the edge of his childhood, a slight, trembling figure with a large nose and bright, attentive eyes, looking down the road that leads away from his mother's house. He packs his trunk, or rather, his mother packs it for him, ensuring he hasn't forgotten his shirts in favor of his books. He is ready to leave the nest, not for adventure on the high seas, but for the adventure of the high mind. The candle flame flickers as the door opens, and the carriage awaits. The boy who was almost lost to the woods is now about to be found by the Enlightenment. The wheels begin to turn, rolling over the cobblestones, carrying the quietest revolution in history toward its next destination, leaving the salt spray of Kirkcaldy behind for the soot and the steam of Glasgow. The carriage wheels rattle over the cobbles of the high street, and the smell of the sea is replaced by something sharper, denser. The scent of coal smoke, tobacco, and the sweat of a city on the rise. We have arrived in Glasgow in the year 1737. Adam Smith is 14 years old, wrapped in the scarlet gown that marks him as a student of the university, a splash of bright red against the crim-blackened stone of the city. To our modern eyes, sending a 14-year-old to university might seem like sending a child to the front lines, but in the 18th century, this is the threshold of manhood. And Glasgow is not just a city. It is a crucible. It is thriving, bursting at the seams with the wealth of the Americas, its merchants walking the streets in scarlet cloaks, known locally as the tobacco lords, possessing a swagger that the quiet boy from Kirkcaldy must find both terrifying and fascinating. But Smith turns away from the commerce of the street and passes through the arched gateway of the University of Glasgow. Here, the noise of the market fades into the hush of the quadrangle. The air feels different, charged with the static electricity of new ideas. This moment marks the true beginning of his intellectual life, the lighting of a flame that will never go out. The university is ancient, established in the 15th century, but under its old spires, a revolution is brewing. This is the Scottish Enlightenment in its early golden dawn. It is a time when Scotland, poor and rugged, decides that its greatest export will be genius. The atmosphere is not one of dreary memorization, but of vibrant, combative, joyous inquiry. And at the center of this whirlwind stands a man who will become the first great hero of Adam Smith's life, Francis Hutcheson. We must pause to look at Hutcheson, for to understand Smith, we must understand the man he called the never to be forgotten. Imagine a lecture hall, crowded with boys in red gowns, the air cold enough to see your breath. In most universities of Europe, the professor would sit like a statue behind a podium, droning on in dead Latin about dead subjects. But Hutcheson is different. He refuses to speak Latin. He speaks in English, clear, passionate, energetic English. He does not sit. He paces. He strides back and forth across the front of the room, his voice rising and falling with the drama of an actor, looking his students in the eye, challenging them, waking them up. He speaks of the greatest happiness for the greatest number, a phrase that rings like a bell in the young Smith's mind. Hutcheson is a professor of moral philosophy, but he teaches that philosophy is not a parlor trick. It is the art of living well. He argues that human beings are not born wicked, as the stern Calvinist preachers in the town kirk claim. No, Hutcheson insists that we are born with a natural capacity for benevolence, that we are wired for kindness, just as we are wired for hunger. We can imagine Adam Smith sitting in the front rows, his large eyes wide, his absent-mindedness replaced by a laser-like focus. For a boy who grew up without a father, Hutcheson becomes a towering paternal figure, a model of what a man of intellect should be, kind, eloquent, and brave. It is here, in these draughty halls, that Smith falls in love with the study of human nature. He learns that the mind is a landscape as vast and explorable as the highlands. But it is not just the lectures that shape him. It is the conversation. The Scottish Enlightenment is fueled by talk, endless, circular, friendly, fierce talk. Smith learns that truth is not something you are given. It is something you hammer out on the anvil of debate. He begins to develop his own voice, tentative at first, then growing stronger. He excels in mathematics and Greek, showing a mind that is both precise and poetic. Yet, historians often debate just how much Smith truly agreed with his beloved teacher. While Hutcheson believed that a moral sense was as immediate as the sense of sight, that we see right and wrong just as we see red or blue, Smith would later develop a more nuanced, perhaps slightly cooler theory. He would come to believe that we learn morality through the mirror of society, by watching others and imagining their judgments. It is a subtle difference, but a profound one. Hutcheson thought we were naturally good. Smith thought we learned to be good because we desperately wanted to be loved. But that divergence lies in the future. For now, there is only the joy of learning. There is a softness to these years, a sense of belonging that Smith has never felt before. He is no longer the lonely boy on the steps. He is a member of a republic of letters. We can picture him in the university library, a sanctuary of wood and leather, losing track of time so thoroughly that the librarian has to shake him by the shoulder to tell him the gates are locking. He walks the gardens of the college, muttering to himself, rehearsing arguments, dissecting the logic of the morning's lecture. It is said that he was popular with his peers, despite, or perhaps because of, his eccentricities. There is a gentle humor in the accounts of his youth. He is the friend you protect, the genius who needs reminding to tie his shoes. The city of Glasgow itself serves as a secondary classroom. Smith watches the merchants, the tobacco lords in their finery, and he notices something that Hutcheson's high-minded philosophy might miss. He sees that these men are driven by self-interest, by the desire for profit, and yet their busy ships and crowded warehouses bring prosperity to the whole city. The baker bakes not out of kindness, but to feed his family, yet the city is fed. The seed of his greatest idea is planted here, in the gap between Hutcheson's benevolence and the bustling reality of the Glasgow streets. It is a puzzle he will spend a lifetime solving. How does a world of self-interested people create a society that is prosperous and hopefully just? But the years at Glasgow fly by too fast, as happy years always do. By 1740, Smith is 17. He has outgrown the red gown. He has absorbed everything Hutcheson has to offer. The never-forgotten teacher has done his job. He has created a student who is ready to surpass him. A new opportunity arises, one that promises to take Smith to the very heart of English academia. He is awarded the Snell Exhibition, a prestigious scholarship to Oxford University. It is a golden ticket, a chance to study at the most famous university in the world. Expectations are high. Everyone assumes that Oxford will be the making of him, that the great libraries and ancient colleges of England will polish this Scottish diamond into brilliance. Smith prepares to leave Scotland again, this time riding south, crossing the border into a country that is wealthier, more powerful, and culturally distinct from his own. He leaves behind his mother, his mentor, and the comforting smoke of Glasgow. He believes he is riding toward the light of knowledge. He does not yet know that he is riding into a fog of indifference. He does not know that the light he seeks will not be found in the lecture halls of Oxford, but will have to be kindled once again within the quiet solitude of his own mind. As the carriage turns south, leaving the friendly chaos of the Scottish Enlightenment behind, we feel a twinge of protective anxiety for the young philosopher. He is riding into the lion's den of complacency. But for tonight, let us leave him with the echo of Hutcheson's voice ringing in his ears, confident, inspired, and blissfully unaware of the silence that awaits him. The journey south takes weeks, a rattle of wheels on rutted dirt roads, crossing the invisible line where the rugged hills of the north soften into the green manicured pastures of England. We arrive now at the dreaming spires of Oxford in the summer of 1740. The air here is different, heavier perhaps, laden with the scent of damp stone and ancient privilege. Adam Smith rides into the city, not as a conqueror, but as an outsider. He is a Scot in an English world, a Presbyterian in a stronghold of the Church of England, and a Whig in a city that still quietly toasts the exiled Stuart kings. He enters the gates of Balliol College, a fortress of grey stone that feels less like a school and more like a monastery of the mind. But as the heavy oak doors boom shut behind him, the silence that greets him is not the hushed reverence of study. It is the hollow silence of neglect. If Glasgow was the forge where ideas were hammered into shape, Oxford is the museum where they are kept under glass, gathering dust. The university is wealthy, ancient, and undeniably beautiful. But in the mid-18th century, it is also deeply, comfortably asleep. This is one of the great ironies of Adam Smith's life. The man who would define the efficiency of labor spent 6 years in a place defined by the luxury of idleness. He quickly discovers that the vibrant debates of Hutcheson's classroom are nowhere to be found here. The professors, or dons as they are called, are secure in their incomes, paid from old endowments regardless of whether they teach or not. And so, quite logically, they do not. Smith would later write, with a biting dryness that echoes through the centuries, that the greater part of the public professors had given up altogether even the pretense of teaching. Imagine the disappointment of a 17-year-old intellectual prodigy. He arrives ready to be challenged, to have his mind stretched by the greatest scholars of the age, only to find the lecture halls empty and the tutors more interested in drinking port and gambling than in discussing Greek syntax. He is required to speak only in Latin, a rule that feels archaic and stifling. The curriculum is a fossil, frozen in the medieval era, ignoring the new sciences and philosophies sweeping across Europe. Smith is trapped in a golden cage. He is lonely. His letters home to his mother, Margaret, are heartbreakingly sparse, hinting at a deep melancholy. He complains of inveterate scurvy and a violent shaking of the head, physical manifestations of his mental isolation. He has no money to travel, no friends who share his intense curiosity, and the English students mock his Scottish accent and his strange, distracted manner. But here in the gloom of Balliol, a crucial transformation occurs. Stripped of guidance, Smith is forced to become his own teacher. He turns his back on the lazy common rooms and retreats into the one place where he feels at home, the Bodleian Library. Close your eyes and smell the scent of that room, the vanilla aroma of decaying paper, the sharp tang of leather binding, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that pierce the high leaded windows. This becomes his sanctuary. For 6 long years, Smith reads. He reads everything. He devours French literature, Italian poetry, and the classics of Greece and Rome. He teaches himself to write by translating the elegant sentences of French authors into English and back again, refining his style until it sings. It is in this solitude that he encounters a dangerous ghost. Rumor has it that one afternoon, the college authorities caught Smith reading a copy of a treatise of human nature by David Hume. At this time, Hume is considered a scandalous atheist, a man whose books are unfit for a Christian university. The Dons confiscate the book and severely reprimand the young student. It is a moment of sharp, dramatic tension. The establishment trying to snatch the flame away from the seeker. But they are too late. Smith has already absorbed the ideas. He has seen how Hume applies the experimental method of science to the human mind. The book is taken, but the seed is planted. Historians often pause here to note the delightful irony. By failing to teach him, Oxford accidentally created him. If the professors had kept him busy with busy work, he might never have had the freedom to explore the vast, unauthorized landscapes of thought that would form the basis of the wealth of nations. His boredom was the soil in which his genius grew. There is a scholarly debate that whispers through this period of his life. Some historians suggest that Smith's harsh critique of Oxford in his later writings was slightly unfair, a grudge held by a lonely, homesick young man who didn't fit in. They argue that there were indeed some active scholars at Oxford, just not in Smith's college. But whether his memory was perfectly fair or not, his experience was real. He learned a lesson about incentives that he would never forget. When men are paid the same, whether they work or sleep, they will almost always choose to sleep. He saw the corruption of a system that lacked competition, a system where there was no penalty for failure and no reward for excellence. He was living inside a broken economic model, and he was taking notes. The years drag on. The seasons turn the ivy on the college walls from green to crimson to dead brown, and back again. Smith grows from a boy into a man of 23. He is incredibly well read, perhaps one of the best read men in Britain, but he has no degree to show for it, having decided not to take holy orders in the church, which was the usual path for an Oxford graduate. He is at a crossroads. The heavy atmosphere of the university has begun to suffocate him. The damp air of the Thames Valley is ruining his health. He wanders the riverside paths, muttering to himself, a solitary figure in a black gown, arguing with invisible opponents, refining theories that no one in Oxford cares to hear. Finally, in 1746, history offers a quiet mercy. The Jacobite rising of Bonnie Prince Charlie has just been crushed at the Battle of Culloden, and tensions against Scots in England are higher than ever. But Smith's departure is not political. It is personal. He simply decides he has had enough. He packs his trunk, heavier now with books and the weight of his own thoughts, and leaves. He does not graduate. He resigns his scholarship. He turns his back on the spires of Oxford without a backward glance, shaking the dust of indifference from his shoes. The journey north feels like an exhalation. As he crosses the border back into Scotland, the air becomes crisper, the voices familiar. He returns to Kirkcaldy, to the house of his mother. Margaret Douglas is there to welcome him, older now, but just as steady. The prodigal son returns, not with a career, not with a wife, not with a fortune, but with a mind sharpened by silence. He is 23, unemployed, and seemingly aimless. To the neighbors, it might look like failure. He sits by the fire in his mother's house, staring into the flames, slipping back into the old rhythm of the tides and the town. But he is not the same boy who left. He is a loaded gun waiting for a trigger. He has spent 6 years inhaling the knowledge of the world. Now he is ready to exhale. The fog of the future swirls around him in the little coastal town. He walks the beach, the grey sand crunching under his boots, wondering what comes next. He has the education of a gentleman, but the prospects of a pauper. But Scotland is not done with him yet. The energy of the Enlightenment is still humming in the south in Edinburgh. City that is about to open its arms to him. A letter arrives, or perhaps a visit from a friend of the family, Lord Keymes, a prominent judge and intellectual. They have a proposition. They need someone to give a series of public lectures in Edinburgh. Not a professor, but a private speaker. Someone who knows about rhetoric, about literature, about the art of speaking well. They ask if Mr. Smith might be interested. Adam Smith looks up from his books. The silence of Oxford is behind him. The conversation is about to begin again. He accepts, and as the candle flickers in the draughty hall of his mother's house, we see a faint smile touch his lips. He is going to Edinburgh. He is going to find his voice. The road from Kirkcaldy to Edinburgh is short, a mere crossing of the Firth of Forth, but in 1748, it represents a journey between two different worlds. We leave the quiet, salt-crusted solitude of the coast and enter the towering, smoky labyrinth of Edinburgh. Close your eyes and imagine the Auld Reekie of the mid-18th century. It is a city built on a spine of volcanic rock, where buildings stretch 10, 12, sometimes 14 stories into the grey sky, leaning over narrow, winding alleyways called closes, like granite giants gossiping in the dark. It is a place of incredible density, where dukes and dustmen live in the same buildings, separated only by the floor they occupy. The air is thick with the smell of peat fires, roasting malt, and the unwashed humanity of a capital city that is bursting with intellectual energy. Into this vertical city steps Adam Smith, now 25 years old. He is no longer the student, but not yet the professor. He is something perhaps more precarious, a freelancer. Under the patronage of Henry Home, Lord Camies, a man with a mind as sharp as a razor and a nose for talent, Smith is hired to give a series of public lectures. The subject is rhetoric and belles lettres. And here lies one of the most delightful paradoxes of Smith's life, a gentle irony that historians have smiled upon for centuries. The man chosen to teach the art of beautiful speaking is, by all accounts, a rather terrible speaker. Smith is not an orator. He has a voice that is described as harsh and slightly stammering. He is prone to getting stuck on a word, his large eyes staring blankly as his mind races ahead of his tongue. When he begins to speak, he often stumbles, appearing unsure and hesitant, like a man testing the ice before stepping onto a frozen lake. And yet, the elite of Edinburgh flock to hear him. Lawyers, merchants, and the sons of nobility squeeze into the lecture hall, paying a guinea apiece, a significant sum, to sit on hard benches and listen. Why? Because once the ice breaks, once Smith finds his rhythm, the hesitation vanishes. The awkwardness dissolves into a lucid, flowing stream of brilliance. He does not dazzle them with thunderous shouting. He seduces them with clarity. In these lectures, Smith does something revolutionary. In the 1700s, rhetoric was usually about flowery language, about memorizing the complex, artificial rules of the ancient Romans to sound important. Smith sweeps this all away. He tells his students to speak simply. He argues that the beauty of language comes from its ability to convey a thought from one mind to another with perfect precision. The perfection of style, he tells them, consists in the expressing in the most concise, proper, and precise manner the thought of the author. It sounds like a rule for writing, but listen closely, and you can hear the first whisper of his economics. He is talking about efficiency. He is talking about the friction-free exchange of ideas. Before he ever wrote about free trade in goods, Adam Smith believed in the free trade of sentiments. There is a wonderful, scholarly mystery woven into this chapter of his life. For over 2 centuries, we knew these lectures existed, but we didn't know exactly what Smith said. He never published them, and as we know, he burned his own notes. They were considered lost to the fog of time. Then, in a moment that feels like a miracle for historians, 2 sets of student notes were discovered, one in 1958 and another in 1961, hidden in old manor houses, gathering dust in attics. Imagine the thrill of brushing away the cobwebs to find the scribbled thoughts of a student from 1748, capturing the voice of young Adam Smith. Through these notes, we can hear him again. We hear him telling jokes about the dullness of tedious historians, analyzing the beauty of Swift and Shakespeare, and treating language not as a dead artifact, but as a living, breathing instrument of human connection. During these years in Edinburgh, Smith is also beginning to think about something else: the law. He lectures on jurisprudence, the theory of justice. He begins to ask how laws evolve. He stops seeing laws as commandments handed down by God or kings, and starts seeing them as agreements that emerge naturally over time, like paths worn into the grass by many feet walking the same way. He suggests that we punish criminals not just because a rule book says so, but because we feel a natural sympathy with the victim. We feel their pain, and our anger is a reflection of that shared humanity. This is the seed of the theory of moral sentiments, germinating in the smoky air of the Edinburgh closes. But life is not all lecture halls and libraries. Edinburgh in the 1740s and 50s is a convivial, clannish place. Smith begins to make friends who will stay with him for life. He meets Alexander Wedderburn, who will become a powerful Lord Chancellor, and perhaps most importantly, he begins to move in the circles that will lead him to David Hume. We can picture Smith in the evenings, walking down the Royal Mile, his head down, muttering to himself, dodging the contents of chamber pots thrown from windows with the cry of "Gardyloo." He retires to the British coffee house, where the air is blue with tobacco smoke, and the conversation rattles on until dawn. Here, the awkward introvert is accepted. He is valued not for his social graces, of which he has none, but for the sheer, unadulterated horsepower of his mind. There is a softness to this period, a sense of a man finding his footing. He is earning his own money for the first time, about £100 a year, a comfortable bachelor's income. He is independent. The gloom of Oxford has lifted, replaced by the grey but friendly skies of Scotland. He lives simply, likely boarding in a modest room, perhaps treating himself to books as his only luxury. He is building a reputation, not as a noisy agitator, but as a quiet man who sees things others miss. One historical truth that anchors this section is the role of these lectures in securing his future. They were, in modern terms, his audition tape. The buzz about the brilliant, if slightly odd, Mr. Smith travels west, back to the city of his university days. In Glasgow, the chair of logic falls vacant. The professors there remember the bright boy in the red gown. They hear of his success in Edinburgh. They want him back. And so, as the year 1750 approaches, the camera of our story begins to pan away from the towering tenements of Edinburgh. We see Smith packing his trunk once more. He is no longer the uncertain youth. He is a man of 27, a rising star in the intellectual firmament of Europe. He has proven that he can teach. He has proven that he can think. Now, he is being called back to the place that first inspired him, to take a seat among the professors he once idolized. The invitation arrives on thick, official paper. He has been elected Professor of Logic at the University of Glasgow. It is the job he was born for. He pays his landlady, says goodbye to his patrons, and prepares to return to the West. As he steps into the carriage, leaving the shadow of Edinburgh Castle, the wind seems to shift. The prelude is over. The great work of his life is about to begin. The quiet man is going home, not to rest, but to wake the world up. The carriage comes to a halt on the high street of Glasgow, the wheels settling into the mud and memory of the city that Adam Smith had left 11 years before. It is 1751, and the air is thick with the peaty tang of coal smoke, a scent that signifies industry and home. We have returned to the university, but the perspective has shifted entirely. The boy in the red gown is gone. In his place stands the man in the black academic robe, adjusting his wig, blinking against the grey light, ready to step onto the podium. These years, the 13 years he will spend as a professor at the University of Glasgow, will later be described by Smith himself as by far the most useful, and therefore by far the happiest and most honourable period of his life. Let those words settle over you like a warm blanket, useful, happy, honorable. In a life often characterized by solitary thought, this is the season of connection, of belonging, of a man finding the exact place in the universe where his strange, specific shape fits perfectly. The University of Glasgow in the mid-18th century is not the quiet, ivy-covered retreat one might imagine. It is a fortress of black stone in the heart of a brawling city. The old college, as it was known, featured two quadrangles of dark, imposing architecture, with a clock tower that told the hours over the heads of merchants and students alike. Here, Smith settles into a rhythm that is as predictable as the tides. He begins as the professor of logic, but within a year, the chair of moral philosophy falls vacant, the very seat once held by his never-to-be-forgotten teacher, Francis Hutcheson. Smith steps into these shoes not with arrogance, but with a quiet sense of duty. He moves into a house in the professor's court, a small enclave of intellect where the faculty lives side by side. And of course, he is not alone. Margaret Douglas, his mother, comes to live with him, along with his cousin, Janet Douglas, who serves as their housekeeper. The three of them form a domestic trinity, a fortress of calm against the chaos of the world. Picture Adam Smith in the classroom. He is not a natural performer. He does not have the booming voice of a preacher or the smooth charisma of a politician. When he begins a lecture, he often stutters. He stands at the front of the hall, staring at a spot on the wall, or perhaps at the face of a single student, appearing almost pained as he tries to pull the ideas from the ether into the air. But as he finds his thread, the transformation occurs again. The hesitation melts away. His large, attentive eyes light up. He begins to weave complex ideas into simple, elegant sentences. He treats his students not as empty vessels to be filled, but as young gentlemen to be persuaded. He abandons the old custom of praying in Latin at the start of class, preferring to get straight to the business of thinking. He trusts them. He watches their faces closely, looking for the spark of understanding. Later, he would tell a friend. During one whole session, a certain student with a plain but expressive countenance was the monitor of my lecture. If he leaned forward to listen, all was right, and I knew that I had the ear of my class. But if he leaned back in an attitude of listlessness, I felt at once that all was wrong and that I must change either the subject or the style. It is during these years that the legend of the absent-minded professor truly takes root. The stories are numerous, affectionate, and woven into the folklore of the city. We are told of a morning when Smith, deep in thought about a philosophical problem, walked out of his front door in his dressing gown. He meant to check the weather, but his legs simply kept moving. He walked past the porter's lodge, past the city limits, and miles out into the countryside, arguing with himself, lost in the architecture of his own mind. He was only roused from his trance by the chiming of church bells in a neighboring village, realizing with a start that he was miles from home and still wearing his bathrobe. Another story tells of him falling into a tanner's pit, a vat of foul-smelling liquid used to cure leather, because he was too busy explaining a theory to a friend to look where he was going. He was fished out, dripping and embarrassed, but likely picked up the argument exactly where he left off. These are not just funny anecdotes. They are evidence of a mind that operated on a different frequency, a mind so fully engaged with the abstract that the physical world became a mere blur. Yet, despite this dreaminess, there is a historical truth here that often surprises people. Adam Smith was a highly effective administrator. We tend to think of geniuses as disorganized, but Smith served as the questor, treasurer, and eventually the vice-rector of the university. He managed the library's budget with penny-pinching care. He oversaw repairs to the buildings. He negotiated with the prickly masters of the college. The man who wrote about the division of labor was not afraid of actual labor. He understood that for the high-minded philosophy to flourish, the roof had to be watertight and the bills had to be paid. There is something deeply reassuring in this, that a man can be a dreamer and a doer, that he can have his head in the clouds and his feet firmly on the ledger. His students adored him. In the evenings, his house in the professor's court became a gathering place. Smith, who was so awkward in large crowds, shone in small groups. We can imagine the scene, the fire crackling in the hearth, a pot of tea or a bottle of claret on the table, Smith sitting in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, holding court. He would talk about anything: Greek poetry, the price of corn, the latest news from the American colonies, the nature of beauty. He had a memory that was encyclopedic, capable of pulling obscure facts from books he hadn't read in 20 years. But he was also a listener. He wanted to know what the young men thought. He treated their ideas with respect, nurturing their intellects with the same care his mother used to nurture his frail body. In this happy cocoon, Smith's philosophy began to mature. He was teaching every day: theology, ethics, jurisprudence, and expediency, which we would now call economics. He saw these not as separate subjects, but as parts of a single great inquiry into human social life. How do we live together? How do we know what is right? How do we survive? The lectures he gave in the cold mornings of the Glasgow winter were the rough drafts of the books that would change the world. He was testing his theories in real time, refining them against the plain but expressive countenance of his students. He was not writing for a distant academic elite. He was writing for these young men, for the future merchants, lawyers, and ministers of Scotland. As the years passed, Smith became a fixture of the city. The merchants of Glasgow, the pragmatic men of business, began to seek his advice. They found that this philosopher, despite his odd habits, understood their world better than they did. He understood why tariffs hurt them. He understood why monopolies stifled innovation. He respected their work. In a time when trade was often seen as vulgar by the aristocracy, Smith saw it as dignified. He saw the dignity in the baker, the brewer, and the butcher. He saw that their labor was the engine of civilization. And so, the camera lingers on a quiet evening in the professor's court. The snow is falling softly on the cobbles outside. Inside, the candles are lit. Margaret Douglas is knitting by the fire. Adam Smith is at his desk, dipping his quill into the ink. He is content. He is safe. He is surrounded by the tools of his trade and the people he loves. He is the happiest he has ever been. But on the desk before him, a stack of paper is growing. He is beginning to write a book, not about wealth, but about the heart. He is about to explore the invisible wires that connect us to one another. The happy professor is about to become a famous author. The year is 1759. Outside the study window, the Scottish spring is trying to break through the grey frost, but inside, a different kind of season is beginning. On the desk, sits a newly bound object, smelling of fresh ink and leather. It is a book, the first fruit of those long, happy years of lecturing. Its title is elegantly stamped on the spine: The Theory of Moral Sentiments. To the modern ear, familiar only with Smith as the father of economics, this title might seem like a mistake. Where is the wealth? Where are the markets? But to Adam Smith, this book was his heart. It was the foundation upon which everything else would be built. Before he could explain how people trade, he had to explain how people feel. Let us gently open the cover and step inside the mind of the moral philosopher. Smith begins with a premise that is startlingly simple yet profound. He asks, how do we, as selfish, isolated creatures, manage to care about others? How can we feel the pain of a stranger? He answers with a single word: sympathy. But he does not mean pity. He means fellow feeling. The ability to instantaneously project our minds into the bodies of others. He uses a vivid sensory example that anyone who has ever watched a performance can understand. He writes of the tightrope walker. When we watch a dancer balancing precariously on a high wire, our own bodies instinctively tense up. We twist and turn on the ground, mirroring the movements of the person in the air. We are not in danger, yet our nerves fire as if we were. By the imagination, Smith whispers from the page, we place ourselves in his situation. This is the core of Smith's universe. We are not islands. We are connected by invisible threads of imagination. But Smith goes deeper. He introduces a character who lives inside every one of us. A ghost he calls the impartial spectator. Imagine a figure standing just behind your shoulder, watching everything you do, knowing your secret thoughts. This figure is not God, and it is not the police. It is a version of yourself, a cool, detached, fair-minded observer. When we act, we are constantly asking, what would the impartial spectator think of this? When we help a neighbor, we do it not just to be nice, but to win the applause of this internal judge. When we hurt someone, the spectator scowls, and we feel the sting of shame. This, Smith argues, is the origin of conscience. It is not a rule written on a stone tablet. It is a habit of the mind, formed by living among other people. Here, we must pause to touch upon a fascinating scholarly debate that has raged for over a century, known among historians as the Adam Smith problem. In the 19th century, German scholars looked at Smith's two great books and claimed they were contradictory. They asked, how can the man who wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, a book based on altruism and sympathy, be the same man who wrote The Wealth of Nations, a book based on self-interest? They thought Smith must have undergone a radical change of heart, or perhaps he was confused. But modern historians, looking closer, see no contradiction. They see a complete picture. Smith believed that in our intimate lives, with family and friends, we are ruled by sympathy. In our commercial lives, with the butcher and the baker, we are ruled by self-interest. We are complex creatures, capable of both love and trade. The Adam Smith problem is not a problem with Smith. It is a problem with our desire to put him in a simple box. But back in 1759, there is no controversy, only triumph. The book is an instant sensation. It sweeps through the drawing rooms of London and the salons of Paris. It is praised for its elegant style, its gentle wisdom, and its optimistic view of human nature. It argues that we are hardwired for morality, that nature has equipped us with the tools to be good. Smith suggests that society is like a mirror. If we lived alone on a desert island, we would have no idea if we were handsome or ugly, kind or cruel. We only know ourselves by looking at the faces of the people around us. We polish our characters by rubbing against the world. There is a moment of delightful warmth connected to the book's release. Smith is in Glasgow, anxiously waiting for news of how the book is being received in London. His dear friend David Hume, who is in the capital, decides to play a prank on the nervous author. He writes a letter to Smith, filling it with ominous news. He says the public is distracted, the book is difficult, the critics are harsh. He lets the tension build, teasing his friend mercilessly. And then, only at the end, does he drop the punchline. Supposing, therefore, that you have duly prepared yourself for the worst of all these consequences, I proceed to tell you the melancholy news that your book has been very unfortunate, for the public seem disposed to applaud it extremely. It is a joke between geniuses, a testament to the easy, playful intimacy that Smith shared with the few people he let inside his guard. The success of the theory of moral sentiments changes Smith's life. He is no longer just a Scottish professor. He is a literary lion. Students travel from Russia and Switzerland just to sit in his classroom and hear the voice of the sage of Glasgow. A portrait of him from this time, or perhaps slightly later, shows a man with a prominent nose, heavy-lidded eyes, and a slight enigmatic smile. He looks like a man who has figured something out, who has looked into the mirror of society and liked what he saw. He is confident. He has proven that philosophy can be popular, that deep thoughts can be expressed in beautiful language. Yet, amidst the applause, Smith remains the quiet man. He does not let fame go to his head. He continues his walks, his mutterings, his duties as the university treasurer. He stays in the house with his mother, the person who, more than anyone, taught him the meaning of sympathy. We can imagine them sitting together in the evenings, the famous book resting on the table between them. Margaret Douglas likely does not understand every philosophical nuance of the impartial spectator, but she understands the heart of her son. She knows that this book is his way of making sense of the love and duty that have bound them together since his birth. The philosophy of moral sentiments gives us a crucial key to understanding the economics that will come later. When Smith later talks about the invisible hand, he is not talking about a cold, robotic force. He is talking about a system made of people. People who have consciences, who care about their reputations, who want to be lovely. A word Smith uses to mean worthy of love. He trusts markets because he trusts the people in them to be, for the most part, decent. He believes that the impartial spectator is watching the marketplace too. As the candle burns lower in the study, Smith closes the cover of his book. He has mapped the human heart. He has explained why we are good. But a new question is beginning to form in the back of his mind. A question that the quiet of the study cannot answer. He has explained how we feel. Now he wants to explain how we thrive. He wants to know why some nations are rich and others are poor. He wants to know how the sympathy of the village square translates into the wealth of empires. The mirror of society is about to expand. The philosopher is about to step out of the classroom and into the wider, wilder world. The happy years in Glasgow are drawing to a close, and the road is calling him once again. The study door closes, But the day is not done. In the damp, soot-stained twilight of Glasgow, the intellectual life of the 18th century did not end when the lectures were over. It merely migrated. We follow Adam Smith now, buttoning his heavy coat against the biting wind coming off the River Clyde, as he steps out of the sanctuary of the college and into the convivial noise of the city night. It is time to explore a side of Smith that contradicts the image of the lonely recluse. Smith, the clubman, the diner, the drinker of claret, and the listener of legends. Glasgow in the 1750s was a city of clubs. These were not the exclusive silent institutions of London gentility, nor were they the raucous taverns of the lower classes. They were something unique to the Scottish Enlightenment, boisterous democratic crucibles where the aristocracy of the mind met the aristocracy of money. There was the Literary Society, the Wise Club, and perhaps most importantly for history, the Political Economy Club, often hosted by the wealthy merchant Andrew Cochrane. Imagine a low-ceilinged room in a tavern, the air thick with the blue haze of tobacco pipes, the fire roaring in the grate, and the table crowded with jugs of punch and plates of beef. Here sits Adam Smith. He is not at the head of the table commanding the room. He is often found slightly to the side, a half-empty glass of wine near his hand, his large eyes moving from face to face. He is surrounded by the tobacco lords, men like John Glassford and Alexander Spears, who wore scarlet cloaks and whose ships sailed to Virginia and the Caribbean. These men were not philosophers. They were practical titans of trade who dealt in risk, insurance, tariffs, and currency. For a moral philosopher, this was an unusual crowd. But Smith was fascinated. Historians have long debated just how much of the wealth of nations was born in these taverns. It is a favorite topic of scholarly contention. Did Smith teach the merchants, or did the merchants teach Smith? The truth, as it often does, likely sits in the middle of the table. Smith gave them the language of liberty and logic. They gave him the raw data of reality. When Smith writes about the specific foolishness of certain customs duties or the intricate mechanics of banking, we can hear the echoes of Andrew Cochrane's voice complaining over a glass of Madeira. Smith was not just theorizing about the economy. He was dining with it. The atmosphere of these gatherings was one of radical openness. In a Scotland still dominated by the strict, dour theology of the Kirk, where dancing was often considered a sin and laughter a suspect activity, these clubs were islands of secular freedom. They were places where men could discuss dangerous ideas without looking over their shoulders. They joked about the absurdities of the clergy, debated the existence of God, and questioned the divine right of kings. To the orthodox preachers outside, these men were atheists and infidels, playing with fire. To Smith, they were simply friends in search of truth. We can spot a gentle humor in Smith's presence here. He was known to be the most absent-minded man in Scotland, and this trait did not vanish after a few glasses of wine. There are stories of him becoming so engrossed in a debate that he would put his bread and butter into the teapot, pour hot water over it, and then complain that the tea tasted terrible. On another occasion, he might start a sentence, stare into the middle distance for a full minute while his friends waited patiently, and then finish the thought with perfect clarity, as if no time had passed at all. He was the beloved eccentric, the genius mascot of the group. But there was a deeper purpose to this socializing. Smith was observing the social passions he had written about in the theory of moral sentiments. He saw how these hard-nosed businessmen, driven by profit, were also bound by a code of honor. They trusted one another's word. They formed a community. He realized that commerce wasn't just about exchanging goods. It was a social activity that civilized men. It made them polite, punctual, and reliable. A merchant who cheated his friends at the club would not remain a merchant for long. The market had its own morality, enforced not by the police, but by the desire to be respected by one's peers. One particular figure looms large in these nights: Robert Simpson, the eccentric professor of mathematics. Simpson was the founder of the Anderston Club, which met in a village just outside Glasgow. He was a man of rigorous habits who counted his steps as he walked and grew furious if anyone interrupted his calculations. In Simpson, Smith saw a kindred spirit, another mind obsessed with order and systems. They would sit together, the mathematician and the philosopher, finding comfort in the precision of their respective worlds. Simpson mapped the geometric laws of space. Smith was beginning to map the geometric laws of society. As the night wears on, the conversation softens. The punch bowl runs low. The topics shift from tariffs to the nature of happiness. This is the sensory heart of the Enlightenment, the warmth of friendship pushing back the cold Scottish night. It is a reminder that the great ideas of history were not formed in sterile laboratories. They were formed in the messy human warmth of taverns, amidst the clinking of glasses and the laughter of friends. Smith, the quiet observer, absorbs it all: the ambition of the merchant, the logic of the mathematician, the humor of the skeptic. The club breaks up. The men spill out into the dark streets, their breath steaming in the frosty air. Smith walks home to the professor's court, his mind buzzing with the evening's debates. He passes the sleeping cathedral, the silent warehouses, the dark ships bobbing on the Clyde. He is alone again, but he is not lonely. He carries the voices of the city with him. He understands now that the wealth of nations is not a static pile of gold, but a living, breathing network of human relationships. He reaches his door. The house is quiet. Margaret Douglas has left a candle burning for him. He blows it out and climbs the stairs. The atheist philosopher returning to the simple, sacred routine of home. The wine has made him sleepy, but his mind is already working on tomorrow's lecture, already weaving the threads of the tavern talk into the tapestry of his great work. The quiet man sleeps, but the city around him, the city he is beginning to explain, never truly stops. In the grand sweeping gallery of the 18th century, where portraits of stern kings and bewigged generals line the walls, there hangs a double portrait that glows with a particular warmth. It is not a painting of war or politics, but of friendship. We turn our gaze now to the most significant relationship of Adam Smith's life, a bond that defined the Scottish Enlightenment and gave it its beating heart. It is the friendship between the quiet, cautious professor from Glasgow and the round, jovial, scandalous genius known as David Hume. If Adam Smith was the mind of the age, deeply analyzing the mechanics of the world, David Hume was its spirit, witty, provocative, and dangerously brilliant. They were the odd couple of philosophy, a pairing that history, with its love of irony, could not have scripted better. David Hume was 12 years older than Smith, a man who had already shocked the world while Smith was still a student. Hume was everything Smith was not. Where Smith was awkward and solitary, Hume was the life of the party, a man so universally liked by the French that they called him Le Bon David. He was physically large, with a broad, cheerful face and a belly that spoke of good dinners and better wine. He was an open skeptic, a man who had looked at the concept of miracles and the organized church, and politely, smilingly, dismantled them with logic. To the strict Presbyterian clergy of Scotland, he was the great infidel, a dangerous influence to be avoided at all costs. To Adam Smith, he was simply my dearest friend. The two men likely met in Edinburgh during Smith's lecturing days, but their connection deepened into a profound intimacy that spanned decades. Imagine them together in a drawing room in Edinburgh. Hume is dominating the conversation, his laughter rumbling through the room, making a scandalous joke about a bishop or a king, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Smith sits nearby, smiling his quiet, enigmatic smile, delighted by his friend's audacity, perhaps interjecting a precise, devastatingly logical point that caps the joke perfectly. They are two halves of a whole. Hume, the bold explorer of the forbidden, Smith, the careful architect of the possible. There is a historical truth here that touches on the delicate danger of their bond. For Smith, a public official of the university and a man who valued his privacy, being best friends with the most notorious atheist in Britain was a professional risk. The Church of Scotland watched them with hawk-like suspicion. Yet, Smith never wavered. He did not shout his loyalty from the rooftops. That was not his style. But he demonstrated it in the quiet consistency of his presence. They wrote to each other constantly. Their letters are a treasure trove of the era, filled with gossip, intellectual debate, and a deep, abiding affection. They worried about each other's health. They critiqued each other's manuscripts with brutal honesty, which is the highest form of love between writers. Scholars have long argued over the exact nature of their agreement on religious matters. Did Smith share Hume's skepticism? Or was he a quiet believer who simply valued tolerance? The text of The Wealth of Nations mentions the author of nature, suggesting a belief in a divine order, while Hume saw a chaotic, godless universe. But in the warmth of their friendship, these theological differences melted away. They were united by something stronger than dogma, a shared belief in the power of reason and the importance of human happiness. They both believed that the goal of philosophy was not to please a distant God, but to improve life here on earth. Hume was the catalyst for Smith's growth. It was Hume's earlier writings on commerce that helped wake Smith up to the importance of economics. Hume had argued that money was not wealth, but merely the oil that greased the wheels of trade, a radical idea that Smith would take and expand into a system. Without the spark of Hume, the engine of Smith's mind might never have turned over with such force. They were competitive too, in a gentle way. When Smith published The Theory of Moral Sentiments, Hume joked that the book was too popular to be good, teasing his friend about catering to the mob, while secretly working tirelessly to promote the book to everyone he knew. There is a softness to the image of Smith visiting Hume's apartment in James's Court, overlooking the steep drop to the Nor Loch. They would sit by the fire as the wind howled around the high tenement, two bachelors married to their work, finding comfort in their shared isolation from the norms of society. Hume, the infidel, was ironically one of the kindest men of his age, known for giving money to the poor and treating his servants with great respect. Smith, the moralist, saw in Hume the living embodiment of the virtues he wrote about. Hume didn't need the threat of hell to be good. He was good because it pleased him to be so. For Smith, this was the ultimate proof that morality was natural, not imposed. One famous anecdote illustrates their dynamic perfectly. Hume, ever the gourmand, once wrote to Smith complaining about the quality of the food at a mutual friend's house, joking that he would not dine there again until the cook was fired. Smith, ever the analyst, likely replied with a breakdown of the agricultural reasons for the poor quality of the beef. They grounded each other. Hume pulled Smith out of his abstractions and made him laugh. Smith gave Hume the respect and intellectual rigor that the church denied him. As the 1760s approached, the dynamic of their lives began to shift. Hume was heading to Paris to become the secretary to the British Embassy, ready to be feted by royalty. Smith was still in Glasgow, grading papers and managing the university accounts. But the wanderlust was catching. The friendship had opened Smith's eyes to a world wider than the Scottish lowlands. He began to feel the itch of a new horizon. The quiet professor was beginning to outgrow his chair. He looked at Hume's adventures and perhaps felt a twinge of envy, not for the fame, but for the freedom. We leave them for a moment in the golden amber of memory. The thin, absent-minded professor and the fat, laughing skeptic walking arm in arm down the Royal Mile, ignoring the glares of the strict Presbyterians. They represent the two sides of the Scottish Enlightenment, the light of the mind and the warmth of the heart. Their friendship is a reminder that even the greatest thinkers need a hand to hold in the dark. It is a comforting thought to drift on, that in the vast gold universe of ideas, these two found each other. And as Smith prepares to leave the safety of Glasgow for the unknown roads of Europe, he carries the laughter of David Hume with him, a talisman against the silence of the world. The year is 1763. The autumn leaves are turning gold along the banks of the Clyde, matching the color of the opportunity that is about to drop into Adam Smith's lap. It is a moment that changes the trajectory of his life, pulling him out of the comfortable chair of the professor and placing him into the swaying carriage of the traveler. The offer comes from London, from the quill of Charles Townshend, a dazzling, erratic politician who will later be known, infamously, for the taxes that sparked the American Revolution. But today, Townshend is not losing colonies. He is looking for a tutor. He needs a man of intellect and character to accompany his stepson, the young Duke of Buccleuch, on the grand tour of Europe. This proposition presents Smith with a difficult calculus. He loves Glasgow. He loves his students. He is surrounded by friends. But the terms Townshend offers are staggering. He proposes a salary of £300 a year, plus traveling expenses, and crucially, a pension of £300 a year for the rest of Smith's life. To put this in perspective, Smith's university income fluctuates based on student fees, rarely reaching half that amount. This offer means financial independence. It means he can eventually retire to write the great book that is gestating in his mind, without ever worrying about the price of coal or candles again. It is the 18th century equivalent of winning the lottery, provided one is willing to babysit a teenager across France. Smith accepts. But the departure is not without its heavy emotional cost. We zoom in on a scene that has become part of the moral folklore of his life. It is his final day in the classroom. The hall is packed. The students who have heard the rumors are silent. Smith delivers his last lecture, his voice perhaps a little tighter than usual. When he finishes, he does something extraordinary. He calls the students up, one by one, and attempts to return the fees they had paid for the remainder of the term. He insists that since he cannot finish the course, he cannot keep their money. The students, however, refuse. They shout him down, crying out that his instruction has already been worth far more than the price of the ticket. Smith, overwhelmed, seizes the younger students by the hand and forces the coins into their pockets. It is a moment of pure, unscripted humanity. The economist, who would explain the cold logic of exchange, is seen here weeping, trying to give money away, driven by an overpowering sense of fairness. In January 1764, the quiet man leaves Scotland. He is 40 years old, an age when most men of his time were settling down, not setting out. He says goodbye to his mother, Margaret, knowing that he will not see her for nearly 3 years. This separation is the true hardship of the journey. He travels to London, and then, with the young Duke, Henry Scott, a boy of 18, he crosses the English Channel. Close your eyes and feel the shift in the air. The smell of peat and rain is replaced by the salt spray of the Channel, and then the unfamiliar, pungent sense of France. The Grand Tour was a rite of passage for the British aristocracy, a finishing school on wheels designed to polish rough island boys into sophisticated European gentlemen. Smith, the absent-minded philosopher who spoke terrible French, seems an unlikely guide for such a venture. Yet, he and the young Duke form a surprising bond. Henry Scott is not a spoiled brat. He is intelligent, malleable, and fond of his eccentric tutor. They are not just teacher and student. They are companions in a strange land. They land in France, and the world opens up. The roads are different, long, straight avenues lined with poplars, built by the absolute power of the French kings, a stark contrast to the winding, muddy tracks of Britain. They rattle south, away from the grey skies, toward the sun. But the journey is not all glamour. The carriages are cramped, the inns are often dirty, and the food is strange. Smith, a creature of habit who thrived on the predictable routine of the university, finds the constant motion disorienting. He writes to Hume, half joking, that he has begun to write a book in order to pass away the time. The boredom of the road is the anvil upon which the wealth of nations begins to be hammered out. Their destination is Toulouse, a city in the south of France, where they will settle for 18 months. Toulouse is a city of red brick and Catholic tradition, steeped in a history that feels ancient and somewhat oppressive to the Protestant Scot. Here, the glamorous image of the Grand Tour fades into a slow, sleepy reality. They know almost no one. The local aristocracy is polite but distant. Smith, who is used to the vibrant intellectual clubs of Glasgow, finds himself adrift in a sea of polite trivialities. He is bored. But historians note that this boredom was a gift. Stripped of his library, stripped of his club, stripped of his duties, Smith is forced to turn inward. He begins to observe the French economy with the fresh, critical eyes of an outsider. He sees a country blessed with rich soil and a perfect climate, yet held back by a tangled web of taxes, internal tariffs, and feudal rules. He sees peasants starving in a land that should be overflowing with plenty. He asks himself, why? Why is France, with all its natural advantages, poorer than the damp, rocky island he left behind? He begins to take notes. He watches the barges on the Garonne River. He talks to the local merchants, struggling to understand their complaints through the language barrier. He sees the taille, a crushing tax on the peasantry that discourages them from improving their land. He sees the corvée, the forced labor system that drags farmers away from their fields to build roads for the king. He is witnessing the failure of a command economy, a system where the state tries to control everything and ends up stifling everything. In the quiet evenings of Toulouse, while the young duke is perhaps out at a dance or studying his fencing, Smith sits by the window, listening to the church bells ring over the red rooftops. He dips his quill and writes. He is no longer just commenting on moral sentiments. He is beginning to sketch the skeleton of a new giant. He writes about capital. He writes about the flow of goods. He writes about the way bad laws can strangle the natural drive of humanity to improve its lot. There is a gentle irony in this scene. The wealthy duke is there to learn how to be a nobleman, but the tutor is learning how to dismantle the very system of privilege that supports nobility. Smith is not a revolutionary in the violent sense. He hates disorder, but his ideas are gathering a force that will eventually topple crowns. As the months in Toulouse drag on, Smith eventually finds his footing. He meets the Abbé Colbert, a cousin of the famous minister, who helps open doors to French society. The quiet man begins to be invited to dinners. He charms the French ladies, not with his looks. He is still the man with the large nose and the nervous tic, but with his evident kindness and his deep, surprising intellect. He is becoming a citizen of the world. The section ends with the carriage wheels turning once more. The 18 months in Toulouse are up. The South has taught him what it could. Now the siren call of the capital awaits. Paris is calling, the glittering, dangerous, intellectual heart of Europe. Smith packs his growing stack of manuscripts. The boredom is over. He is about to walk into the lion's den of the French Enlightenment to meet the men who think they have solved the riddle of wealth. He is ready to test his Scottish ideas against the brilliance of France. The carriage rattles over the cobblestones of the Place Royale, and the rhythm of the story shifts from the slow, sun-baked boredom of Toulouse to the frenetic, glittering pulse of Paris. It is Christmas, 1765. Adam Smith has arrived in the capital of the world. If Glasgow was the engine room of the 18th century, Paris is its ballroom, a place of blinding luxury, intellectual ferocity, and dangerous ideas whispered behind silk fans. The air here smells of roasting chestnuts, heavy perfume, and the faint underlying stench of the open sewers that run through the center of the streets. A sensory reminder that beneath the gold leaf, the old problems of infrastructure remain unsolved. Smith is no longer the lonely traveler. In Paris, he is a celebrity. The fame of the theory of moral sentiments has preceded him, translated into French and devoured by the elite. He is welcomed not just as a tutor, but as Le Sage Smith, the wise philosopher from the north. He steps into the salons, the famous living rooms of brilliant women like Madame Geoffrin and Mademoiselle de l'Espinasse, where the Enlightenment is being directed like a symphony. Imagine the scene, crystal chandeliers casting a warm, trembling light over a room crowded with dukes, poets, and scientists. The conversation moves faster than a fencing match, switching from the existence of God to the price of grain in a single breath. Smith, with his halting, heavily accented French, is an observer in the eye of the storm. He is often seen standing in the corner, his large head slightly cocked, absorbing the torrent of words. He is awkward, yes. He still forgets to bow at the right time or stares too long at a tapestry. But the French find him charming. They see a profound bonhomie in him, a gentle goodness that disarms their sharp cynicism. He is not there to compete with their wit. He is there to mine their minds. And there are diamonds to be found. The most important encounter of this Parisian winter is with a group of thinkers who call themselves les économistes, or, as history will know them, the physiocrats. At their center sits François Quesnay, the personal physician to Madame de Pompadour and the king himself. Quesnay is an old man, sharp-eyed and confident, who holds court in his apartments at the Palace of Versailles. He treats the economy exactly as he treats the human body, as a system of circulation. He has drawn a famous diagram, the tableau économique, a zigzagging chart of lines and numbers that traces how money flows from the farmer to the landlord to the merchant and back again. Smith is fascinated. He looks at Quesnay's tableau and sees something familiar. It is the first serious attempt to describe the economy not as a hoard of gold, but as a living, breathing organism. Quesnay argues that wealth does not come from the king's treasury. It comes from the flow of production. But here, the Scottish philosopher and the French doctor diverge, and the friction of their disagreement sparks a light that will illuminate the future. The physiocrats believe in a rule of nature. They argue passionately, dogmatically, that all true wealth comes from the land. Only the farmer creates something new. He plants a seed and gets two in return. The merchant, the manufacturer, the artisan, they are merely sterile classes, moving things around but creating nothing. Smith listens, nods, and quietly disagrees. He thinks of the pin factory. He thinks of the nail makers in Kirkcaldy. He knows that labor, not just land, creates value. He sees that the man who turns raw iron into a useful tool has added to the wealth of the nation just as surely as the man who grew the wheat. Yet Smith treats Quesnay with immense respect. He will later describe the physiocratic system as, with all its imperfections, perhaps the nearest approximation to the truth that has yet been published upon the subject of political economy. It is a generous nod from one genius to another. Historians often wonder what would have happened if Quesnay had not died, shortly before The Wealth of Nations was published. Smith had intended to dedicate the book to him. It would have been a tribute to the man who taught him to see the economy as a circle, even if Smith eventually realized the circle was wider than the doctor thought. There is a wonderful human texture to Smith's time in Paris. He is not just debating theory. He is living the high life. He goes to the theater regularly, developing a passion for French drama. He buys new clothes, trading his somber Scottish woolens for silk breeches and velvet coats, trying, perhaps unsuccessfully, to look the part of a man of fashion. He writes to Hume, reporting on his social calendar with a mix of pride and exhaustion. He meets Turgot, a brilliant administrator who is trying to tear down the internal trade barriers of France, a man who shares Smith's hatred of monopolies. They speak of laissez-faire. Let it be. Let it go. Let it pass. The phrase is French, born of the frustration of merchants strangled by the state. But Smith is the one who will give it a soul. But amidst the glamour, Smith never loses his critical eye. He sees the cracks in the porcelain. He sees a France that is beautiful but brittle, held together by the absolute power of a monarchy that is slowly running out of money. He sees the farmers general, the despised tax collectors who build walls around Paris to charge duties on every loaf of bread that enters the city. He sees the stark contrast between the velvet of the salon and the rags of the street. He is gathering evidence. He is seeing what happens when a government tries to do too much, when it tries to channel the blood of the economy instead of letting it flow naturally. One particular evening stands out in the mist of history. Smith is dining at the house of Baron de Holbach, a wealthy atheist who hosts the most radical thinkers in Europe. The wine is flowing, and the guests are tearing apart the established order, attacking religion, attacking the king, attacking the very idea of authority. Smith listens. He does not join the attack with the same ferocity. His temperament is too moderate, too Scottish. But he realizes that the old world is dying. The system of feudal privilege, of guilds that lock men into jobs, of kings who treat nations as personal piggy banks. It is all rotting from the inside. He realizes that the world needs a new explanation, a new set of rules that matches the reality of the rising commercial age. He leaves the dinner, stepping out into the cool Parisian night. The gas lamps are flickering along the Seine. He walks back to his lodgings, his mind racing. He has the pieces now. He has the moral philosophy from Glasgow. He has the observation of the merchant class from the clubs. He has the sterile boredom of Toulouse. And now he has the systemic vision of the physiocrats. The puzzle is almost complete. He just needs time, quiet, uninterrupted time, to put it all together. But the grand tour is not over yet. There is still a duty to discharge. The young Duke of Buccleuch is thriving, learning the graces of a nobleman, and Smith is the diligent guardian. They plan to stay in Paris a while longer, to soak up the final drops of enlightenment. The spring of 1766 promises to be beautiful. The chestnut trees in the Tuileries are preparing to bloom. Smith feels a sense of momentum, a feeling that he is standing on the precipice of his life's great work. He does not know that a shadow is about to fall across the sunlit path of the tour. He does not know that tragedy is waiting in the wings, ready to cut the journey short and send him back to the grey mists of home. For now, let us leave him in the glow of the salon, a cup of coffee in his hand, listening to Turgot explain the price of grain, nodding slowly, while the invisible hand of history prepares to turn the page. The seeds are sown. The harvest will be gathered in Scotland. In the quiet hours of the Parisian morning, before the carriages begin their clatter along the Seine and the salons open their gilded doors, Adam Smith sits alone at a small, cluttered desk. The winter light of early 1766 is pale and thin, illuminating a stack of papers that has grown steadily thicker over the last 2 years. This stack is not merely a diary or a collection of lecture notes. It is the embryonic form of the wealth of nations. To understand the weight of this manuscript, we must pause the forward motion of our camera and look at what Smith is carrying in his luggage. We must understand that while his body has been traveling through the grand avenues of France, his mind has been traveling through a landscape of its own making. A journey that began, as the title of this chapter suggests, in the desperate, productive boredom of Toulouse. It is a historical truth that boredom is often the mother of invention, and for Smith, the solitude of the south of France was the crucible. Back in Toulouse, stripped of his library and his friends, He had turned to writing as a survival mechanism. I have begun to write a book, he had told Hume, in order to pass away the time. It is a phrase of characteristic Scottish understatement. He was not just passing time, he was restructuring the world. Now in Paris, those early notes are being fleshed out. The new book, as he thinks of it, is becoming a living thing. It is absorbing the conversations of the physiocrats, the complaints of the merchants, and the logic of the philosophers, digesting them into a system that is entirely Smith's own. But there is a missing piece to this intellectual puzzle, a vital stop on the grand tour that we must weave into the tapestry before the tragedy strikes. Between the boredom of Toulouse and the glamour of Paris, Smith and the Duke had made a pilgrimage to the edge of the Alps, to the Republic of Geneva. They went there for one reason: to meet the king of the Enlightenment, the great Voltaire. Picture the scene in late 1765. The air in Geneva is crisp, smelling of pine and snow, a sharp cleanser after the humid heat of the south. Voltaire, the most famous man in Europe, lives in a princely estate at Ferney, just across the border. He is over 70, a withered, cackling, brilliant figure who has spent a lifetime fighting tyranny with the weapon of wit. Smith, the quiet, absent-minded Scot, enters the lion's den with a sense of reverence. He has a portrait of Voltaire on his wall, back in Glasgow. He considers him a hero of reason. The meeting is one of history's great, quiet collisions. We have few transcripts of what was said, but we can imagine the dynamic. Voltaire, theatrical and Quicksilver holding court. Smith, listening with that intense, head-cocked focus, absorbing the energy of the old master. Historians still argue about the depth of this influence, but many believe that the sharper, more biting edge found in the wealth of nations, the sarcastic asides about crafty politicians, and the mean rapacity of merchants, was sharpened on the whetstone of Voltaire's humor. Smith learned that one could be serious about the world without being solemn. He learned that a well-placed joke could do the work of 10 pages of logic. It is said that Voltaire, in turn, was charmed by Smith, recognizing the immense power lurking behind the shy exterior. He would later write, "This Smith is an excellent man. We have nothing to compare with him." Back in Paris, with the memory of Geneva fresh in his mind, Smith looks at his manuscript with new eyes. He realizes that the French thinkers, for all their brilliance, have missed something. The physiocrats are obsessed with agriculture, believing it to be the only source of wealth. Smith, remembering the smoke of Glasgow and the nailmakers of Kirkcaldy, knows they are wrong. He writes in his notes, scratching out lines, refining his argument. He sees that wealth is not just what grows from the ground. It is what is produced by human labor in all its forms. The lace-maker, the pin-maker, the philosopher, they are all part of the great wheel. He is also wrestling with a concept that will become the bedrock of his theory, the idea of natural liberty. In France, he sees a system where the government tries to direct every aspect of life, telling farmers what to plant, telling weavers how to weave, telling merchants where to sell. And he sees that it doesn't work. It creates poverty and frustration. He contrasts this with the natural system he envisions, where every man is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest, his own way, and to bring both his industry and capital into competition with those of any other man. It is a radical thought, written in the heart of an absolute monarchy. He is dismantling the logic of kings, one sentence at a time. There is a softness to these days of writing. Smith, it's happy. He has found a rhythm. He spends his mornings with the manuscript, his afternoons in the salons, and his evenings at the theatre. He is surrounded by the most stimulating minds in Europe, yet he maintains his independence. He is not a disciple of Quesnay. He is a critic. He is not a follower of Voltaire. He is a peer. He is gathering the best of the continent and filtering it through his Scottish common sense. The new book is becoming a synthesis of British pragmatism and French systemic thinking. And let us not forget the Duke. The young Henry Scott has grown up. The shy boy who left Dover is now a polished young man of 20. He speaks excellent French, dances well, and navigates society with ease. Smith has done his job. He has been a father, a teacher, and a friend. The bond between them is deep and genuine. Smith writes to his friends in Scotland that the Duke is one of the most worthless fellows in the world. A heavy-handed Scottish joke meaning exactly the opposite, that he loves the boy dearly. The Grand Tour has been a success. They are planning their return. They will stay in Paris until the autumn, then head back to London, and finally home. But the manuscript on the desk is not finished. It is a sprawling, messy collection of chapters. It needs order. It needs the quiet of Kirkcaldy to be tamed. Smith feels the pull of home. He misses his mother. He misses the damp fog of the Firth of Forth. He is tired of the silk breeches and the rich food. He yearns for his old dressing gown and a simple bowl of porridge. He imagines sitting in his mother's house, organizing these notes into the masterpiece he knows they can be. As the spring of 1766 turns into summer, a subtle tension enters the narrative. The perfect equilibrium of the trip begins to wobble. Smith complains in letters of a stomach complaint, perhaps a reaction to the rich Parisian diet, or perhaps a somatic sign of his desire to return to his own routine. The absent-minded spells return. He is seen walking through the Tuileries gardens, muttering to himself, gesturing at the statues, lost in the intricate architecture of his economic system. The Parisians watch him pass. Lesage Smith, a man walking in a world of his own. One evening, he puts down his quill. The candle has burned low. He looks at the stack of paper, hundreds of pages now. He does not know that it will take another 10 years to finish. He thinks he is almost done. He thinks the hard work is behind him. He smiles, a private, satisfied smile. He has conquered boredom. He has conquered the salons. He has explained the world to himself. Now, he just needs to explain it to everyone else. But history is rarely a straight line. Just as the end seems in sight, the road takes a sharp, dark turn. The new book will have to wait. The philosophy of sympathy is about to be tested by a sharp, sudden grief. The camera pulls back from the window of the apartment, leaving the manuscript bathing in the moonlight, and turns towards the sleeping city, where a messenger is riding through the night, carrying news that will shatter the calm of the Grand Tour. The interlude is over. The reality of mortality is about to intrude on the world of ideas. The summer of 1766 in Paris is heavy and humid, the air thick with the promise of storms that never quite break. The lightness of the Grand Tour, with its salons and theatres, begins to curdle into something more somber. We find Adam Smith and his party preparing for a short excursion to Compiègne, a town north of Paris, where the royal court often resides in the summer. It is meant to be a routine trip, a chance to see the king review his troops, a splash of pageantry before the final return to England. But as the carriages roll out of the city gates, a shadow falls over the party. The younger brother of the Duke, the 19-year-old Hugh Scott, who has joined them in Paris, falls ill. At first, it seems like a trifle, a fever, a headache, the usual complaints of a traveler in a foreign land. But in the 18th century, a fever is never just a fever. It is a roll of the dice with mortality. The illness deepens with terrifying speed. The laughter of the salons feels suddenly very far away. Smith, the philosopher who has spent years analyzing the sentiments of sympathy, is now called upon to exercise them in the most painful way possible. He watches helplessly as the young man, a boy he has come to know and care for, slips away. The best doctors in France are summoned. Quesnay himself, the great physician and leader of the physiocrats, is consulted. But the medicine of the time is powerless against the virulent infection. On October 19th, 1766, Hugh Scott dies in Paris. The shock is absolute. The Grand Tour, which was supposed to be a triumphant procession of learning and pleasure, ends in a devastating silence. The Duke of Buccleuch is heartbroken. Smith is deeply shaken. The responsibility weighs heavily on him. He was the guardian, the man in charge, and though no one blames him, illness was the capricious master of the age. He feels the burden of the loss. The vibrant intellectual debates of the last 2 years dissolve instantly. The manuscript on the desk, the theories of wealth, the arguments with Voltaire, all of it is rendered trivial by the brute fact of death. There is no more talk of staying in Paris. The city has lost its luster. The glittering lights now seem cold and indifferent. The party packs their trunks, not with souvenirs, but with grief. They make the grim journey back to the coast, crossing the channel under grey, weeping skies. They arrive in London in November, bringing the body of the young Scot home to his family. It is a dark, heavy return. Smith navigates the difficult emotional terrain with the Duke's family, offering what comfort he can, his stoic philosophy tested by the raw reality of a mother's grief. But amidst the sorrow, a new chapter begins to open for Smith. His duty is discharged. He is no longer a tutor. He is no longer a professor. He is a man of independent means. The generous pension from the Duke, £300 a year for life, begins now. He is free. He never has to work for money again. He can live where he wants, do what he wants, and write what he wants. Most men in his position would stay in London, basking in the literary fame of the capital, dining at the clubs, and enjoying the company of the great and the good. Smith does the opposite. He turns his back on the noise. He retreats. In the spring of 1767, Adam Smith returns to Kirkcaldy. He goes home to the house on the high street, to the smell of the sea and the silence of the small town. He moves back in with his mother, Margaret Douglas, and his cousin Janet. To the outside world, it looks like a retirement. His friends in London are baffled. David Hume writes to him, teasing and pleading, "I want to know what you have been doing," and propose to exact a rigorous account of the method in which you have employed yourself. Come to town. You are in the wrong place. Hume cannot understand why a man of Smith's brilliance would bury himself in a provincial backwater. But Smith knows exactly what he is doing. He is not retiring. He is going to work. He writes back to Hume with a gentle, contented defiance. My business here is study. I am always extremely happy, comfortable, and contented. I never was, perhaps, more so in all my life. Close your eyes and picture the scene. The new book is unpacked from the trunk. The stacks of notes from Toulouse, the diagrams from Paris, the observations from Geneva, they are all spread out on the desk in his study. The room is quiet, save for the ticking of a clock and the distant cry of gulls. The distractions of the world are gone. There are no students to teach, no dukes to tutor, no salons to attend. There is just the man, the mind, and the mountain of paper. Smith settles into a routine of almost monastic discipline. He wakes early, takes long solitary walks along the beach, muttering to himself, refining his sentences to the rhythm of the waves. He returns to his study and writes. He dictates to a secretary, pacing the room, rubbing his head against the wall above the fireplace, a habit that eventually leaves a dark, greasy stain on the wallpaper, a physical mark of his mental labor. He is wrestling with the material, trying to wrestle the chaotic reality of the world into a coherent system. It is a time of deep, productive solitude, but it is not without its struggles. The work is harder than he thought. The sheer scope of the project, to explain the entire economic history of the world, is overwhelming. He dives into the history of Rome, the price of silver in China, the colonial policies of Spain, the herring bounties of Scotland. He is drowning in data. There are days of frustration, days when the invisible hand seems to be hiding the answers from him, but he presses on, fueled by the quiet care of his mother, who ensures the house runs smoothly around him, protecting his concentration like a sacred flame. The tragedy in Compiègne has changed him. It has stripped away the desire for superficial applause. He is no longer writing to impress the ladies of the salon. He is writing to understand the machinery of civilization. The grief has perhaps added a deeper, more somber bass note to his work. He sees how fragile life is, how easily the thread is snapped, and so he wants to understand how we can make life better, more secure, more prosperous for the time we have. He wants to understand how the wealth of nations can be used to buffer us against the cruelty of fate. The section ends with Smith standing at his window, looking out over the Firth of Forth. It is night. The town of Kirkcaldy is asleep. The only light comes from his study. He is alone, but he is connected to the whole world through the pages on his desk. He is the quiet man in the eye of history, spinning the threads that will one day bind the globe. He is happy. He is home, and the great work is finally, slowly, coming to life. The calendar turns to 1776, a year that vibrates with the energy of a breaking dam. To the west, across the grey Atlantic, the ink is drying on a declaration that will sever the political bonds of an empire. But in London, on a foggy day in March, another declaration is quietly placed on the shelves of the booksellers, a declaration not of political independence, but of economic reality. An inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations has arrived. It costs £1 and 16 shillings, a hefty sum for the time. Yet the first edition sells out in 6 months. The timing is uncanny, almost mystical. Just as the American colonies are rejecting the heavy hand of King George III, Adam Smith is rejecting the heavy hand of the mercantilist state. The two revolutions, one of the gun, the other of the pen, are twins born of the same desire for liberty. We must pause to appreciate the physical object itself before diving into its soul. It is a formidable work, spanning 2 volumes and nearly 1,000 pages. It is not a dry textbook filled with equations. It is a sprawling, conversational, encyclopedic journey. It is filled with history, with sociology, with psychology. Smith talks about the price of silver in Peru, the education of youth in Greece, the herring fisheries of Scotland, and the habits of the corn trade. It is a book that tries to hug the entire world. It is written in plain, elegant English, designed to be read not just by professors, but by statesmen, merchants, and gentlemen. Smith wants to be understood. He avoids the jargon of the scholars. He speaks of the butcher, the brewer, and the baker, grounding his high theories in the smell of yeast and the sawdust of the shop floor. The reception is immediate and electric. David Hume, now nearing the end of his life, writes a letter that vibrates with pride. Huge Bell. Dear Mr. Smith, he cries, using the Latin for well done. I am much pleased with your performance. It has depth and solidity and acuteness, and is so much illustrated by curious facts that it must at last take the public attention. But Hume, ever the realist, warns him. It requires too much thought to be as popular as the cumbersome. He worries the book is too smart for the politicians. He is half right. The politicians will read it, but they will take decades to truly understand it. The book enters a world dominated by a system called mercantilism. This was the belief that a nation's wealth consisted of the gold and silver it had locked in its vaults. Kings believed that to be rich, you had to sell more than you bought, hoarding the difference. They treated trade like a war. If France won, England lost. They slapped tariffs on imports, subsidized exports, and treated colonies like captive customers who were forbidden from trading with anyone else. It was a system of jealousy, hoarding, and control. Smith takes a hammer to this fortress. He opens the book with a revolutionary definition. The annual labor of every nation is the fund which originally supplies it with all the necessaries and conveniences of life. Read that again. Wealth is not gold. Wealth is stuff. It is the shirt on your back, the bread on your table, the roof over your head. It is the stream of goods and services that we produce and consume. A nation with a vault full of gold but starving people is poor. A nation with no gold but well-fed, well-clothed people is rich. It is a shift in perspective so profound that it is like switching from a flat earth to a round one. He argues that trade is not a war. It is a positive sum game. If I sell you a bottle of wine and you give me a wool coat, we are both better off. I wanted the coat more than the wine. You wanted the wine more than the coat. We have both gained value. The same is true for nations. If France makes cheaper wine and England makes cheaper wool, they should trade freely. France should stop trying to make bad wool, and England should stop trying to grow bad grapes. By specializing and trading, the total wealth of the world increases. This is where the American question comes crashing in. Smith is writing while the guns are firing at Bunker Hill. He looks at the colonies and sees the folly of the British system. He argues that Britain is paying a fortune to defend colonies just to maintain a monopoly on their trade. A monopoly that actually hurts British consumers by keeping prices high. He calls the British Empire a project of the imagination, a glittering fantasy that costs more than it is worth. He proposes a radical solution. Either give the Americans full representation in Parliament, creating a transatlantic superstate, or let them go peacefully and trade with them as friends. By thus parting good friends, he writes, the natural affection of the colonies to the mother country would quickly revive. It is a voice of sanity in a time of madness. The book is also a mirror held up to the powerful. Smith is not a sycophant for the rich. In fact, the wealth of nations is filled with stinging critiques of the merchant class. He warns that businessmen rarely meet, even for merriment, without the conversation ending in a conspiracy against the public to raise prices. He attacks the East India Company, the giant corporation that ruled India, calling it a nuisance and a tyrant. He is on the side of the consumer, the common man, the poor laborer. He argues for high wages, noting that no society can surely be flourishing and happy, of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable. As the year 1776 draws to a close, the world has changed. In Philadelphia, a bell has rung for political liberty. In London, a book has been published for economic liberty. The two freedoms are intertwined. Smith has provided the blueprint for a world where people are free to choose their work, free to trade their goods, and free to pursue their own happiness. The quiet man has not just explained the world, he has set it in motion. The old walls of feudalism and protectionism are still standing, but the foundation has been cracked. The light is pouring in. The camera lens of our history narrows now. We leave the grand stage of empires and revolutions, the smoke-filled clubs of Glasgow, and the gilded salons of Paris. We zoom in past the bustling city streets, through a narrow doorway, and into the dim, metallic dust of a small workshop. It is here, in the humblest of settings, that Adam Smith locates the engine of the modern world. We are entering the pin factory. It is a scene of mesmerizing repetition. Close your eyes and listen to the rhythm. Clink, scrape, snip, grind. The air smells of iron filings and stale sweat. In the center of the room, a group of men are working with a speed that blurs the eye. Smith observes them with the fascination of a naturalist watching a hive of bees. He is not interested in the pins themselves, tiny, insignificant things used to fasten a lady's shawl or hem a skirt. He is interested in the miracle of their production. In a world before the division of labor, a single craftsman would make a pin from start to finish. Imagine him. He must go to the mine to get the ore, smelt it, draw the wire, straighten it, cut it, point it, grind the head, attach the head, and polish the steel. It is a slow, clumsy dance. Smith calculates that a workman, no matter how skilled, if he did it all himself, could scarce, perhaps, with his utmost industry, make one pin in a day, and certainly could not make 20. One pin. A single, lonely object for a day's life. But look at the factory now. Smith describes the transformation with the precision of a poet. One man draws out the wire, another straights it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, a fifth grinds it at the top for receiving the head. He breaks the task down into 18 distinct operations. The work is divided. The unity of the craftsman is shattered into the fragments of the assembly line. And the result, it is nothing short of magic. Smith observes a small factory of just 10 men. They are poor. They are indifferent. Their machinery is indifferent. Yet by working together, by each focusing on a single tiny slice of the job, they can make, hold your breath, 48,000 pins in a day. From 20 to 48,000. It is an explosion of productivity so vast that it seems to defy the laws of physics. Each man, who could barely make one pin alone, is now effectively making 4,800. This is the division of labor. It is the first great concept of the wealth of nations, placed right at the opening of the book, because it is the key to everything else. Smith argues that the wealth of a country doesn't come from its soil or its climate. It comes from its capacity to organize work. He identifies 3 reasons why this works, and as he lists them, we can see the blueprint of the industrial future being drawn. First, there is the increase in dexterity. The man who spends his entire life straightening wire becomes a virtuoso of wire straightening. His hands move without thinking. He becomes a human machine, flawless and fast. Second, there is the saving of time. The solitary craftsman wastes time moving from the anvil to the furnace, putting down the hammer to pick up the file. He saunters, as Smith gently puts it. The specialized worker never stops. The flow is continuous. And third, Smith argues that when you focus on one simple task, you're more likely to invent a machine to do it for you. He tells a charming, likely apocryphal story of a boy whose job was to open and close a valve on a steam engine, who tied a string to the handle so he could go play with his friends, thus inventing the automatic valve. But Smith sees further than just the factory floor. He follows the pin out of the door and into the world. He realizes that this explosion of productivity causes a universal opulence which extends itself to the lowest ranks of the people. Because the factory makes pins so cheaply, even the poorest peasant wife can afford them. The division of labor drives down the cost of living. It turns luxuries into necessities. It clothes the world. Here, we must pause for a moment of scholarly nuance. A shadow in the corner of the bright factory. Historians often debate whether Smith was the first to notice this. He wasn't. The concept had been floating around, but he was the first to place it at the center of the human story. However, there is a darker truth woven into his observation, one that is often conveniently forgotten by those who worship Smith as the saint of unbridled capitalism. Smith worried about the men in the factory. He realized that there was a terrible human cost to this efficiency. He writes, much later in the book, a passage that is haunting in its empathy. He observes that a man who spends his whole life performing a few simple operations, like cutting a wire, has no occasion to exert his understanding. His mind, unused, begins to atrophy. He becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. Smith warns that while the nation grows rich, the individual worker might grow spiritually poor, reduced to a cog in a machine, stripped of the intellectual, social, and martial virtues of the old craftsman. It is a startling admission. The man who praised the division of labor also feared it. He saw the zombie-like stare of the assembly line worker 2 centuries before. It became a cliché of modern film. This is the Smithian paradox. The very thing that makes society wealthy makes the individual's work boring. But Smith, ever the pragmatist, does not suggest we go back to the old ways. We cannot give up the 48,000 pins. The path to wealth is a one-way street. Instead, he proposes a remedy, one that was radical for his time: state-funded public education. If the factory numbs the mind, the school must wake it up. The government has a duty to ensure that the common people are not sacrificed on the altar of productivity. Let us drift back to the image of the pin factory, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. It is a scene of profound ambivalence. On one hand, it is a triumph of cooperation. 10 men who might dislike each other, who might not speak the same language, are working in perfect harmony to create a mountain of value. They are an orchestra of industry. On the other hand, it is the birth of the grind. The romance of the artisan is gone, replaced by the relentless tempo of the process. Smith stands in the doorway, watching. He sees the future. He sees the Ford assembly lines, the silicon chip fabricators, the global supply chains that will one day carry a smartphone from a mine in Africa to a pocket in London. He sees the immense, staggering power of breaking things down. He understands that we are trading the wholeness of the self for the wealth of the species. As the workers lay down their tools and the noise of the factory fades into the evening quiet, Smith walks away, his mind already moving to the next link in the chain. The pins are made. But how do they get to the customer? How does the pin maker get his bread? The factory has shown us how we make things. Now, we must understand how we exchange them. The invisible hand is waiting to pick up the pin. The factory door closes, and the hum of the pin makers fades into the background. Adam Smith steps out into the bustling market square of the village. It is market day. The air is thick with the smells of life, the metallic tang of fresh blood from the butcher's stall, the warm yeasty aroma of baking bread, and the sharp, sour scent of ale fermenting in the brewer's barrels. It is a sensory map of human need. Here, amidst the haggling and the shouting, Smith observes the fundamental transaction that keeps the world alive: dinner. He poses a question that seems simple, but cuts to the bone of human existence. Why do these people feed us? Why does the butcher wake up at dawn to slaughter the ox? Why does the baker stand in the sweltering heat of the oven? Why does the brewer roll the heavy casks? Is it because they love us? Is it because they worry that we might go hungry? Smith shakes his head. He knows human nature too well. He knows that while we are capable of deep sympathy for our friends and family, our capacity to care for strangers is limited. We cannot love the whole world. And so he writes the sentence that will become the most famous in the history of economics. A sentence that has been quoted, misquoted, celebrated, and reviled for 250 years. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Let those words hang in the air for a moment. Self-interest. In the modern ear, this term often sounds harsh, synonymous with greed or selfishness. But Smith meant something different, something quieter and more dignified. He meant self-love, the natural, healthy desire of every person to survive, to improve their condition, to take care of their own. He argues that we cannot base a civilization on charity alone. Charity is noble, but it is capricious. It is a thin reed to lean on when you are starving. You cannot wait for the baker to feel generous. You need him to want your money. Smith is suggesting a radical form of social cooperation. He is saying that we don't need to be friends to help each other. We don't need to share the same religion or the same politics or even speak the same language. The market creates a bridge between strangers. When you buy a loaf of bread, you are helping the baker feed his children. When the baker sells it to you, he is helping you feed yours. It is a mutually beneficial exchange, a double gratitude. The miracle is that by pursuing his own profit, the baker accidentally becomes your servant. He works for you, ensuring the bread is fresh and the price is fair, not because he loves you, but because he fears his competitor across the street. This is the system of natural liberty. It dignifies the common man. In the old feudal world, you got your dinner by begging the Lord, by showing loyalty, by knowing your place. In Smith's world, you get your dinner by offering something in return. You stand up, you trade. You appeal not to the butcher's humanity, but to his self-love. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. There is a deep, scholarly nuance here that often gets lost. Smith is not saying that greed is good. He is not saying that we should be selfish. Remember, this is the same man who wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments. He knows that a life driven only by self-interest is a hollow, lonely life. But he is a realist. He knows that in the vast, anonymous web of the modern economy, we cannot rely on the warmth of the heart. We need the reliability of the contract. The market handles the strangers. The heart handles the friends. Let's look at the butcher, the brewer, and the baker again. They are not villains. They are the pillars of the community. Smith sees a quiet heroism in their reliability. He sees that the pursuit of profit, when checked by competition, forces people to be honest. If the butcher sells bad meat, he loses his customers. If the baker cheats on the weight of the loaf, he goes out of business. The market imposes a discipline that is often stricter than the law. It rewards the virtues of diligence, prudence, and reliability. But Smith also sees the comedy in it. He sees how we deceive ourselves. We work hard to get rich, thinking that wealth will make us happy. We chase baubles and trinkets, as he calls them, fancy watches, silver buckles, great houses. We exhaust ourselves, ruining our health and our peace of mind, just to get a little more comfort. And does it make us happier? Smith smiles and says, probably not. The beggar sunning himself by the side of the road has the peace of mind that kings fight for. Yet, and this is the twist, this deception is useful. It is this deception which rouses and keeps in continual motion the industry of mankind. Because we think wealth will make us happy, we build cities, we drain swamps, we invent sciences, we create art. Our vanity drives the progress of the species. We are like donkeys chasing a carrot, pulling the cart of civilization behind us. The individual might be chasing an illusion, but humanity as a whole moves forward. There is a softness to this section of the story. It reassures us that we don't have to be saints to be useful. We don't have to have pure motives to do good. We can be ordinary, flawed, self-interested people and still contribute to the wealth of nations. The butcher chopping his meat, the brewer stirring his vat, the baker kneading his dough. They are part of a vast, unconscious conspiracy of cooperation. As the sun sets over the market square, the stalls are packed away. The coins have changed hands. The dinner is cooking in 1,000 pots. Adam Smith walks through the emptying streets, listening to the sounds of the evening meal. He understands that the noise of the market is not the noise of chaos. It is the noise of people taking care of themselves, and in doing so, taking care of each other. The invisible hand is not just moving goods, it is feeding the world. But what exactly is this invisible hand? It is a phrase we have danced around, a phrase that has become a myth. Now, as the market sleeps, we must turn our attention to the most famous and most misunderstood metaphor in the history of thought. We must find out where the hand actually points. We drift now from the noise of the market, leaving the butcher and the baker to their evening rest, and float back into the hushed sanctuary of the library. The candle flickers, casting long dancing shadows against the shelves. We are looking for a phrase, a ghost that haunts the modern world. We are looking for the invisible hand. If you were to search through the 1,000 pages of the Wealth of Nations, you might be surprised by how hard it is to find. It does not appear in the opening chapter. It is not printed in bold letters on the cover. It appears exactly once, buried deep in Book 4, in a paragraph that discusses the dry, technical subject of foreign trade and capital investment. It is one of history's quietest whispers that became a shout. Smith writes of a merchant who prefers to support domestic industry rather than foreign industry, simply because he feels safer watching his capital grow close to home. He is not trying to be a patriot. He is just trying to sleep at night. He is driven by his own security, his own gain, and then the moment arrives. He is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. That is it. The most famous metaphor in economics is a throwaway line about risk aversion. But Smith meant something profound by it. He was describing a paradox of order. He was asking, how is it that a chaotic mess of millions of people, all chasing their own selfish little dreams, doesn't collapse into anarchy? Why is there milk in the store? Why is there coal in the furnace? Why does the city not starve? The invisible hand is his shorthand for the self-regulating nature of the market. It is the force that aligns private passion with public good. When the merchant tries to get rich, he inadvertently creates jobs, lowers prices, and creates wealth for the nation. He does good without meaning to. But here, we must gently pull apart the myth from the man. In the centuries since his death, the invisible hand has been turned into a religion. Some have used it to argue that markets are perfect, that greed is always good, and that governments should never, ever touch the economy. Smith would likely have found this amusing and perhaps a little horrifying. He was not a believer in magical thinking. He did not think the hand fixed everything. He knew that sometimes the hand could form a fist. This brings us to the mercantilist trap, the great dragon that Smith was trying to slay. In 1776, the governments of Europe were obsessed with the balance of trade. They believed that the economy was a zero-sum game, like a poker match. If England won, France had to lose. They believed that the only way to be a rich nation was to export as much as possible and import as little as possible, thereby hoarding gold in the king's vaults. To achieve this, they built a prison of regulations. They banned the export of wool. They put massive tariffs on French wine. They gave monopolies to their friends. They treated trade not as a handshake, but as a weapon. Smith looked at this system and saw a trap. He argued that hoarding gold was foolish. Gold is just a yellow metal. You can't eat it, you can't live in it. True wealth is the flow of goods. He used a wonderfully simple example to mock the mercantilists. He pointed out that a tailor does not try to make his own shoes. He buys them from the shoemaker. The shoemaker does not try to make his own clothes. He buys them from the tailor. If a household makes sense by trading, why does a nation make sense by stopping trade? What is prudence in the conduct of every private family, he wrote with devastating logic, can scarce be folly in that of a great kingdom. Smith saw these trade barriers as walls that made everyone poorer. By protecting British winemakers, who made terrible wine, the government was forcing the British public to pay more for a worse product. They were stealing from the consumer to give to the producer. Smith was the champion of the forgotten man, the consumer. He argued that the whole point of production was consumption. We work so we can eat. But the mercantilists had flipped it upside down. They thought the point of the economy was to provide jobs for their friends and gold for the crown. There is a fascinating scholarly debate that lingers in the candlelight of this section. Was the invisible hand a religious reference? Smith was a man of the Enlightenment, but he used language that hinted at a providence or a great architect. Was he saying that God himself arranged the market, or was he simply using a poetic metaphor for a systemic mechanism like gravity? Most modern historians lean towards the secular view. Smith was observing a social gravity. Just as planets don't need a pusher to stay in orbit, markets don't need a planner to stay in balance. Smith reserved his sharpest wit for the man of system, the arrogant politician who thinks he can arrange people like pieces on a chessboard. He writes with a gentle but biting humor about this type of leader. The man of system, Smith says, forgets that human beings aren't wooden chess pieces. They have their own motion, their own desires, their own will. If the politician tries to force them against their nature, telling them where to work, what to buy, what to sell, the game will end in misery and rebellion. It is a warning that rings true across the centuries, from the court of Louis XVI to the central planning committees of the 20th century. But Smith was not an anarchist. He did not believe in a Wild West economy. This is the nuance that is often lost in the bedtime stories told by free market purists. Smith knew that the invisible hand needed a stable body to attach to. It needed rules. It needed justice. He knew that merchants, if left unchecked, would try to cheat. He famously warned that people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. So, the invisible hand is not a license for chaos. It is a description of a delicate, beautiful energy that exists between free people. It is the energy of the obvious and simple system of natural liberty. Smith invites us to trust it. He invites the kings and the ministers to relax their grip, to stop micromanaging the world, and to let the natural flow of human interaction do its work. As we turn the pages of Book 4, the atmosphere in the study feels lighter. The heavy chains of the mercantilist state are clanking to the floor. The walls of the fortress are dissolving. Smith is showing us a world where nations are not enemies, but partners. He is showing us that the prosperity of our neighbor is not a threat, but an opportunity. If France gets rich, they will buy more British wool. If America thrives, they will buy more British tools. The wealth of one is the wealth of all. The candle burns lower, casting a warm glow on the leather binding of the great book. We have seen the hand. We have escaped the trap. But a question remains. If the government stops meddling in trade, what is left for it to do? Is the king to simply sit on his throne and do nothing? No. Smith has a job for the sovereign, a job that is vital, difficult, and surprisingly modern. The invisible hand can move the market, but it cannot build the road the market travels on. The candle in the study has burned down to a nub, but the light it casts is clearer now. We have spent the last hour stripping away the walls of the old fortress, tearing down the tariffs, the monopolies, and the heavy-handed regulations of the mercantilist kings. It would be easy in this moment of liberation to imagine that Adam Smith is guiding us toward a world with no walls at all, a wild, untamed garden where the strongest weeds choke out the flowers. But this is where the quiet man surprises us again. He is not an anarchist. He is not a dreamer who believes that men are angels. He knows that the invisible hand cannot operate in a vacuum. It needs a body to protect it. It needs a spine. And so, in the final book of The Wealth of Nations, Smith lays down the quill of the revolutionary and picks up the trowel of the architect. He begins to build the duties of the sovereign. It is a historical truth, often ignored by his most fervent disciples, that Adam Smith believed deeply in the state. He did not view the government as a necessary evil, but as a vital necessity. He outlines 3 distinct duties that the sovereign must perform, duties that are too important and too expensive to be left to the whims of the market. These are the pillars upon which the system of natural liberty rests. The first duty is defense. Smith looks at the world of 1776 and sees a dangerous place. Empires are colliding, revolutions are burning. He knows that a rich nation is a tempting target for a poor, hungry neighbor. The first duty of the sovereign, he writes, is that of protecting the society from the violence and invasion of other independent societies. Here, Smith steps into a heated debate of his time. Many thinkers believed in militias, citizens grabbing their muskets to defend their homes. Smith disagrees. He argues that war has become too complex, too technical. The division of labor applies to war just as it applies to pins. We need professional soldiers. We need a standing army. It is a pragmatic, unromantic view. He understands that to enjoy the peace of the market, one must pay for the sword of the state. The second duty is justice. This is the heart of his moral philosophy, bleeding into his economics. The duty of protecting, as far as possible, every member of the society from the injustice or oppression of every other member of it. Without justice, there is no commerce. If a merchant cannot trust that a contract will be enforced, he will not trade. If a farmer fears that his harvest will be stolen by a powerful lord, he will not plant. Smith sees the government as the ultimate referee. It must be an impartial spectator, writ large, holding the scales, enforcing the rules of the game. He is particularly fierce about the independence of judges, arguing that they must be free from the influence of the king or the mob. Justice, for Smith, is the roof that keeps the reign of chaos from ruining the house. But it is the third duty that feels most modern, most surprising to those who paint Smith as the enemy of public spending. He argues that the state must build and maintain certain public works and certain public institutions. These are things that are deeply useful to society, but will never be profitable for a private individual to own. Think of a lighthouse. A ship captain needs the light to avoid the rocks. But how do you charge him for a beam of light? You cannot. And so, the market will not build the lighthouse. The state must step in. Smith lists roads, bridges, canals, and harbors. He envisions the government as the great facilitator, smoothing the friction of the world. He wants the road to the market to be paved, safe, and free of bandits. He wants commerce to flow like water. Then the camera moves to a darker corner of the nation away from the bustling roads and the safe harbors. We return to the shadow of the bin factory. Smith remembers the man whose life is spent cutting wire. He remembers the mental mutilation that comes from doing the same tiny task 10,000 times a day. He worries that in a commercial society, the common people will lose their curiosity, their spirit, and their ability to think. He fears a nation of rich pockets and empty heads. And so, Adam Smith becomes a champion of public education. In the 18th century, this was a radical, almost dangerous idea. The aristocracy often believed that educating the poor was a mistake, that it would make them dissatisfied with their lot in life. Smith rejects this with a quiet, simmering anger. He argues that the state has a duty to prevent the drowsy stupidity of the worker. He proposes a system of parish schools, funded partly by the public purse, where every child, even the poorest, can learn to read, write, and account. He looks to his native Scotland, with its network of local schools, as a model. He wants the government to encourage, perhaps even require, a basic level of education before a man can open a shop or join a guild. But notice the nuance. Smith does not want the schools to be fully free. He suggests that the master should be paid partly by the students, because if he was wholly paid by the public, he would soon learn to neglect his business. It is the realist in him speaking again. He trusts incentives. He wants the teacher to care because his dinner depends on it. Yet, the core of the idea remains. The state must invest in the minds of its people. Smith argues that an educated public is not just happier, it is safer. A man who can read, who can understand the world, is less likely to be swept up by the delusions of enthusiasm and superstition. He is less likely to riot. He is a better citizen. Smith sees education as a form of mental defense, just as the army is the physical defense. He writes with a touching reverence for the dignity of the common man. He does not see the laborer as a beast of burden, but as a human being capable of rational conversation and generous sentiment, if only the state will give him the tools. There is a softness to this vision of the state. It is not the Leviathan, the terrifying monster of Thomas Hobbes that rules through fear. Nor is it the absent landlord of the anarchists. It is a gardener. It tends the soil. It pulls the weeds of injustice. It waters the dry ground with education. It builds the trellises of infrastructure so that the vines of commerce can climb. Smith's government is modest, limited, but active. It does not try to tell the plant how to grow, but it ensures that the sun can reach the leaves. As we linger in this section, we feel a sense of balance returning to the story. The invisible hand is powerful, yes, but it is not a god. It is a force of nature that needs to be channeled. Smith is handing us a toolkit for civilization. He is telling us that we need both the energy of the market and the wisdom of the state. We need the baker's self-interest to feed us, but we need the judge's impartiality to protect us. We need the pin factory to make us rich, but we need the schoolhouse to keep us human. The candle flickers again. The great book is drawing to a close. Smith has built the system. He has explained the prices, the wages, the profits, and the taxes. He has explained how the machine works. But history is not just about writing books. It is about living them. And now, the quiet man is about to leave the world of theory and step back into the world of action. A letter has arrived from London. The King's government has a job for him. It is a job that is drenched in irony, a job that will see the father of free trade putting on the uniform of the tacksman. The study door opens. The mist of the Scottish coast rolls in. Adam Smith stands up, stretches his stiff back, and prepares for the final act of his public life. He is going to become a commissioner of customs. He is going to enforce the very laws he spent a lifetime criticizing. And in doing so, he will show us one last lesson about duty, integrity, and the complex reality of living in an imperfect world. The mist clears from the cobblestones of the Royal Mile, and we find ourselves in Edinburgh in the year 1778. The great labor of the book is finished, the accolades have been collected, and Adam Smith is 55 years old. He has returned to the capital of Scotland, not to rest on his laurels, but to clock in. In a move that feels like a cosmic joke scripted by a mischievous historian, the man who spent a decade dismantling the logic of trade barriers is appointed as a commissioner of customs. It is a position of immense irony. The prophet of free trade is now the warden of protectionism. He is the gatekeeper charged with enforcing the very tariffs, duties, and prohibitions he argued were stifling the wealth of nations. His friends are baffled. They wonder if he has sold out or if he intends to destroy the system from the inside. But Smith sees it differently. He accepts the post with a grave sense of duty. The salary is excellent, £600 a year, which, combined with his pension from the Duke, makes him a very wealthy man. But it is not just about the money. Smith believes in the rule of law. He believes that as long as the laws exist, they must be administered fairly and without corruption. If the invisible hand is the spirit of the market, the customs commissioner is the flesh and blood hand of the state. Imagine the scene at Bunmore House, the grand, gloomy mansion in the Canongate district where Smith now lives. It is a house of stone and shadow, filled with the smell of old books and the sea coal burning in the grate. One evening, shortly after taking his post, Smith is found rummaging through his own wardrobe. He is pulling out shirts, ruffles, and handkerchiefs made of French cambric and lace, fabrics that are technically illegal to import under the strict British laws he is now sworn to uphold. He does not hide them. He does not give them away. He carries them to the fire. In a letter to a friend, he writes with a dry, self-deprecating wit, "I found a great stock of prohibited articles in my wardrobe, and have made a sacrifice of them all. Watch the flames lick at the expensive lace. Watch the smoke curl up the chimney. It is a small, private bonfire of the vanities. It is an act of supreme integrity." Smith refuses to be a hypocrite. He will not enforce a law on the smugglers of Scotland that he is not willing to enforce on himself. It is a moment that tells us more about his character than 1,000 pages of philosophy. He is a man who lives by the rules, even the foolish ones. Smith takes his new job seriously. He is not a figurehead. 4 days a week, rain or shine, he walks the mile from his house to the custom house near the Royal Exchange. We can picture him, a distinct figure in a light-colored coat, carrying a bamboo cane on his shoulder like a soldier's musket, moving with a peculiar stumbling gait. He often talks to himself as he walks, smiling at invisible companions, oblivious to the fishwives and the lawyers bustling around him. But when he arrives at the office, the dreamer vanishes. He sits at the board table, surrounded by ledgers. He examines the accounts. He adjudicates disputes over seized cargo. He deals with the nitty-gritty of tea duties and tobacco taxes. There is a historical truth here that is often overlooked. Smith was a very good bureaucrat. He applied his massive intellect to the mundane machinery of government. He discovered that the customs service was bloated and inefficient, filled with sinecures, jobs that paid a salary but required no work. Smith, the enemy of waste, quietly began to suggest reforms. He advised the government to lower the taxes on tea and spirits, arguing, using the logic of his book, that lower taxes would actually increase revenue by reducing the incentive to smuggle. He was testing his theories in the laboratory of the real world. The smugglers of Scotland, however, likely did not appreciate the philosopher's logic. To them, he was just another government man. Yet Smith showed a surprising lack of judgment in one humorous regard. He recommended that the military be used to crack down on the illegal distilleries in the Highlands. He failed to foresee that the soldiers, upon finding the whiskey, would simply drink it rather than destroy it. It was a rare moment where the nature and causes of human thirst defeated the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Despite the drudgery of the office, Smith is happy. He is surrounded by his family, his aging mother, Margaret, now extremely frail, and his cousin, Janet Douglas. They are the anchors of his life. Panmure House becomes a fortress of domestic peace. Smith, the bachelor who never married, finds his emotional fulfillment in being a dutiful son. He rushes home from the custom house to dine with them, to ensure the fire is warm enough for his mother's old bones. He is wealthy now, but his tastes remain simple. The only thing he spends money on lavishly is his library, which continues to grow, filling the walls of the house with the leather-bound wisdom of the ages. "I'm a beau in nothing but my books," he famously confesses. The irony of his position softens over time. The world begins to catch up with him. The Prime Minister, Lord North, and later his son, William Pitt the Younger, begin to read The Wealth of Nations. They start to ask Smith for advice. There is a famous story of a dinner party in London where Smith arrives late. As he enters the room, everyone stands up, including the Prime Minister. Smith, embarrassed, asks them to sit. Pitt replies, "No, we will stand until you are seated, for we are all your scholars." The man who burns his own illegal shirts is now teaching the men who write the laws. The section closes with a view of Smith walking home in the Edinburgh twilight. The wind is blowing off the Firth of Forth, cold and biting. He grips his cane. He is tired. The walk up the hill seems steeper than it used to be. He passes the tavern where he will later host his famous Sunday suppers. But for now, he just wants the quiet of his study. He has spent the day counting barrels of herring and bales of wool. He has done his duty to the king. But as he unlocks the door of Panmure House, he is stepping back into the kingdom of the mind. The invisible hand has guided him to a strange place, a tax collector's desk. But he has found a way to serve both the state and the truth. He hangs up his coat, kisses his mother on the forehead, and sits by the fire. The revolutionary is resting, but the house is about to fill up. The final act of his life will be defined not by solitude, but by a gathering of the brightest lights in the north. The Sunday suppers are about to begin. The heavy oak door of Panmure House swings open, spilling golden light onto the dark stones of the cannon gate. It is Sunday evening. The wind is howling outside, a classic Edinburgh gale that rattles the sash windows, but inside the air is still and warm, scented with roasted lamb, candle wax, and the distinct dusty aroma of thousands of books. We have arrived at the final social sanctuary of Adam Smith's life, the Sunday suppers. For a man known for his solitude and his awkwardness, Smith was a surprisingly generous host. Every Sunday, his dining room became the intellectual epicenter of Scotland. The guest list was a rolling catalogue of the Enlightenment's greatest minds. There was Joseph Black, the chemist who discovered carbon dioxide, or fixed air, as he called it, and latent heat. There was James Hutton, the father of modern geology, who looked at the rocks of Edinburgh and realized the earth was millions of years old, not thousands. There were visiting dignitaries from America, Russia, and France, all eager to break bread with the author of The Wealth of Nations. Smith sits at the head of the table, not as a king, but as a benevolent, slightly distracted conductor. He is older now. His hair is powdered white, his large eyes are a little dimmer, and his nervous tic, a slight shaking of the head, is more pronounced. He is known to fall into brown studies right in the middle of dinner, staring at a spoon or a shadow while the conversation rages around him, only to snap back into focus with a brilliant observation about the Roman Senate or the price of sugar. The food is simple but plentiful. Smith is not a gourmet like his friend Hume was. He views food as fuel for conversation, but he is obsessed with one particular delicacy: sugar. He has a sweet tooth that is legendary. Friends joke that the economist who explained the global sugar trade is single-handedly keeping the Caribbean plantations in business with the number of lumps he drops into his tea. It is a small, humanizing detail. The great philosopher defeated by a sugar bowl. The conversation at these suppers is free-flowing and fearless. Unlike the rigid salons of Paris, where wit was a weapon, the atmosphere here is one of scientific curiosity. Hutton talks about the slow erosion of mountains. Black talks about the properties of gases. Smith talks about the invisible mechanics of the market. They are all systems men. They all believe that the world, whether it is made of rock, air, or money, follows rational laws that can be discovered by the human mind. They are dissecting the universe over a plate of mutton. One regular guest deserves special mention: Edmund Burke, the great Irish statesman and philosopher. Burke and Smith had met in London and found themselves in perfect intellectual harmony. Burke famously said that Smith's book was, in its ultimate results, probably the most important book that has ever been written. At Barnmuir House, they would sit late into the night, discussing the brewing trouble in France. Smith, who had seen the poverty of the French peasants and the arrogance of their kings, likely shared Burke's fear that a violent explosion was coming. They were two conservative revolutionaries, men who wanted to change the world, but feared the chaos of sudden upheaval. But these suppers were not just for the famous. Smith was incredibly kind to the young. He would often invite students or young writers to the table, listening to them with the same serious attention he gave to lords. He had a way of making a young man feel like a genius. He would nod, smile, and say, "I'm glad to hear you say so, sir," giving the novice the confidence to speak his mind. He was practicing what he preached, the sympathy that binds society together. Yet, there is a shadow in the corner of the room. As the wine is poured and the fire crackles, Smith's eyes often drift to the empty chair where his best friend should be. David Hume is gone. He died in 1776, just months after The Wealth of Nations was published. The loss is a dull, constant ache in Smith's life. He misses the laughter. He misses the one man who could tease him out of his abstractions. The Sunday suppers are joyful, yes, but they are also a way of filling the silence left by Hume. Smith is surrounding himself with noise and life to keep the loneliness at bay. There is a charming, slightly slapstick story from these years that captures Smith's enduring absent-mindedness. One Sunday, a friend began to criticize a certain politician, calling him a scoundrel. Smith, waking from a daydream, vehemently defended the man, praising his character and his virtues. The friend paused, looked at Smith, and gently pointed out, "But Mr. Smith, that is the very man you were cursing just 10 minutes ago." Smith blinked, paused, and then said, deal care, it's all true." He had forgotten his own opinion, but he was happy to argue both sides. As the evening winds down, the guests begin to leave. They step out into the cold Edinburgh night, their heads buzzing with ideas. Smith stands at the door, bowing them out, a frail but sturdy figure framed by the candlelight. He turns back into the empty house. The servants clear the table. He walks to the library, his true home. The walls are lined with 3,000 books, his bows. He runs a hand along the spine of a volume of Greek history. He is tired. The work of the customs house is grinding him down. His health is failing. He suffers from a painful stomach ailment that makes eating difficult. But he does not complain. He has his mother, who is now over 90, a fragile bird of a woman who still treats him like her little boy. He sits with her for a while, holding her hand. The great economist, the man who corresponds with prime ministers, is just a sun in the dim light of the parlor. The wind rattles the panes. The city sleeps. Smith knows that his time is coming. He has one more task to do, one more duty to perform for the sake of his legacy. He looks at the piles of unfinished manuscripts in his study, lectures on law, essays on art, theories on science. They are rough, imperfect, unfinished. He cannot bear the thought of them being read by strangers, misunderstood, or mocked. He makes a decision. The fire in the grate is burning low, but soon it will need to be fed. We must pause the forward motion of the calendar and step back into the shadow that hangs over Panmure House. To understand the depth of Adam Smith's character, we must revisit the year 1776, not for the triumph of his book, but for the tragedy of his loss. The death of David Hume is the emotional crater in the landscape of Smith's life. It is the moment where the philosophy of Stoicism, of keeping a stiff upper lip, is tested against the raw, messy reality of grief. In the summer of 1776, while The Wealth of Nations is flying off the shelves in London, David Hume is dying in Edinburgh. He is suffering from a slow, wasting disease, likely bowel cancer or severe colitis. But Hume, the great infidel, is facing death with a cheerfulness that scandalizes the religious zealots of the city. They gather like vultures, waiting for him to crack, waiting for the atheist to scream for a priest at the final moment. They want a confession. They want fear. Hume gives them nothing but jokes. Smith travels to see him. He finds his friend gaunt and weak, but his mind is as sharp as a diamond. Hume sits in his chair, making light of his condition. He tells Smith a fable about Charon, the ferryman of the dead. He imagines arguing with Charon, asking for a little more time. "Have a little patience, good Charon," Hume says. I have been endeavoring to open the eyes of the public. If I live a few years longer, I may have the satisfaction of seeing the downfall of some of the prevailing systems of superstition. But Charon, in Hume's imagination, loses his temper. You loitering rogue, that will not happen these many 100 years. Get into the boat this instant. Smith laughs. It is a laughter mixed with tears. He records this conversation with the precision of a court stenographer, amazed by his friend's courage. He sees that Hume is dying exactly as he lived, without fear, without superstition, and with total intellectual honesty. When Hume finally passes on August 25th, 1776, Smith is devastated. But his grief takes a public form that will cause him more trouble than any economic theory ever did. He decides to publish an account of Hume's final days, along with a eulogy. He concludes the piece with a sentence that rings like a bell across the centuries. I have always considered him, both in his lifetime and since his death, as approaching as nearly to the idea of a perfectly wise and virtuous man as perhaps the nature of human frailty will permit. The reaction is explosive. To call an avowed atheist perfectly wise and virtuous is, in 1776, a radical act. It is a slap in the face to the church. It implies that one can be good without God. The attacks on Smith are vicious. He is called a friend of Satan, a corrupter of youth. A prominent bishop attacks him in print. Smith, who usually ignores criticism, is stung. He later writes to a friend that this single act of loyalty brought upon him 10 times more abuse than the very violent attack I had made upon the whole commercial system of Great Britain. Think about that. He attacked the merchants, the guilds, the monopolies, and the empires, and they grumbled. He praised his atheist friend, and they screamed. But Smith does not retract a word. He stands by his friend. This is the impartial spectator in action. He knows that the public is wrong. He knows that Hume was a good man, kind, generous, and honest. To say otherwise would be a lie. Smith chooses truth over popularity. It is a quiet, stubborn kind of bravery. He essentially says to the world, "Judge me if you want, but I will not dishonor the man I loved." This period reveals the deep, almost religious solemnity of Smith's friendship. For him, the bond between two minds was sacred. In a life without a wife or children, friendship was his primary form of love. Losing Hume was like losing a limb. He continues to visit Hume's grave on Calton Hill, a bleak, windswept spot overlooking the city. He oversees the construction of the monument, a simple Roman-style tower that still stands today. He ensures that Hume's last wishes are respected. He is the executor of his memory. The death of Hume changes the tone of Smith's final years. He becomes more solitary, more reflective. The Sunday suppers are a way to fill the void, but the spark is different. He realizes that he is the last survivor of a golden age. The giants of the Scottish Enlightenment are falling one by one. He feels the cold wind of his own mortality. Yet there is no panic. Smith settles into a rhythm of duty and memory. He works at the custom house. He cares for his mother. He reads his books. He is living out the philosophy he taught in Glasgow so many years ago. That happiness comes from tranquility, and tranquility comes from doing one's duty. He is not chasing baubles anymore. He is simply trying to be a wise and virtuous man, just like his friend. As we leave this section, we see Smith standing before the fireplace in Bonmuir House, looking at a portrait of Hume. The firelight flickers on the canvas, making the painted eyes seem to twinkle. Smith raises a glass of claret to the empty room. "To the boat, David," he whispers. "To the boat." It is a toast to the past and a preparation for his own future. He knows the ferryman is waiting for him too. But before he gets in the boat, there is one last piece of business to attend to. The manuscripts, the unfinished thoughts, the piles of paper that must not survive him. The fire in the grate is hungry. The year is 1790. The Scottish summer has arrived, but the air inside Barnmuir House is still and heavy, carrying the unmistakable hush of a sick room. Adam Smith is 67 years old, and he is dying. The stomach ailment that has plagued him for years has returned with a vengeance, accompanied by a slow, wasting weakness that confines him to his chair. He is shrinking, the large frame becoming gaunt, the famous nose sharper against the pale skin. But as his body fades, his mind remains gripped by a singular, burning anxiety. It is not a fear of death. He has studied the Stoics too well for that. It is a fear of imperfection. For months, Smith has been pestering his two closest friends, the chemist Joseph Black and the geologist James Hutton, with a strange and urgent request. He wants them to destroy his papers. He has appointed them as his literary executors, but he does not trust them to do the deed after he is gone. He knows how history works. He knows that the scraps and scribbles of a famous man are often gathered up by well-meaning friends and published for the world to see. He shudders at the thought. He imagines his half-finished lectures, his rough drafts, his unpolished theories being dissected by the critics of London and Paris. He cannot bear the idea of leaving behind anything that is not, in his eyes, perfect. The tension comes to a head on a quiet Sunday evening. Smith is sitting by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, his breathing shallow. Black and Hutton are visiting, perhaps hoping to distract him with talk of rocks and chemistry. But Smith will not be distracted. He looks at the stack of manuscripts sitting on the desk. 16 folio volumes of them. They represent decades of thought. There are lectures on rhetoric from his youth in Edinburgh. There is a massive, unfinished history of law and government that was meant to be his third great book. There are essays on the arts, on music, on the history of science. It is a treasure trove of the Enlightenment, and Smith points a trembling finger at them. "You must burn them," he insists. "Now, I cannot rest until it is done." The friends hesitate. We can imagine the look exchanged between Black and Hutton. They are scientists. Their instinct is to preserve knowledge, not destroy it. They know the value of what is in those pages. They try to stall, suggesting they can sort through them later, that there might be gems worth saving. But Smith becomes agitated. His voice, weak but fierce, cuts through their reluctance. He tells them that if they do not do it, he will die miserable. He is pleading for his dignity. Finally, they agree. The scene that follows is one of the most painful and poignant in the history of ideas. The fire in the grate is stoked until it roars. The servants are dismissed. The two friends, heavy-hearted, begin to feed the manuscripts into the flames. Watch as the pages catch. The ink curls and vanishes. The theories of justice, the histories of Rome, the analyses of beauty, they all turn into smoke and float up the chimney, disappearing into the Edinburgh night. Smith watches from his chair, his eyes fixed on the destruction. He does not look sad. As the pile diminishes, as the last volume turns to ash, his shoulders relax. A visible wave of relief washes over him. "I'm easy now," he whispers. "I'm entirely easy." It is a moment of profound psychological revelation. Adam Smith, the man who explained the world, was a perfectionist of the highest order. He valued quality over quantity to an extreme degree. He did not want to be a papermaker churning out books for the sake of it. He believed that an author owed the public his absolute best, or nothing at all. He chose silence over mediocrity. Historians have wept over this fire for 200 years. We can only guess at what was lost. We know from student notes that he had a brilliant theory of jurisprudence, tracing how law evolves with the economy. That is gone. We know he had written about the imitative arts of painting and sculpture. That is gone. The third book that would have completed his triad, moral sentiments, heart, wealth of nations, wallet, and the history of law, society, exists only as a ghost. It is the missing leg of the stool. But we must respect the man's wishes. In an age of oversharing, where every thought is published and every draft is saved, there is something deeply dignified about Smith's restraint. He wanted to curate his own legacy. He wanted to be remembered for the polished diamond, not the rough stone. He saved only a few small things, a handful of essays, including a beautiful piece on the history of astronomy, which he allowed to be published after his death. Everything else he sentenced to the fire. The burning is done. The room is quieter now, save for the settling of the embers. Black and Hutton sit with their friend, perhaps pouring a glass of wine to wash away the taste of the smoke. Smith is exhausted but peaceful. He has tidied up his life. He has settled his accounts with history. He has no debts left to pay. A few days later, the Sunday supper guests arrive as usual. They do not know about the fire. They expect the usual conviviality, the usual debate. Smith manages to join them for a short while, but he is too weak to eat. He sits at the head of the table, smiling at the faces of his friends, the men who have been his family, his university, his club. He listens to the hum of conversation, the sound he has loved since he was a boy in Glasgow. But he cannot stay. The fatigue is pulling him down like a heavy tide. He stands up, gripping the table for support. The room goes silent. Everyone looks at the quiet man, sensing that this is a farewell. Smith looks around the table, his eyes lingering on each face. He offers them a final, gentle smile, full of the warmth and courtesy that defined his life. "I believe we must adjourn this meeting to some other place," he says softly. It is a perfect exit line. It is a joke, a blessing, and a goodbye all wrapped in one. He is telling them that the conversation will continue, perhaps in a better world, perhaps just in the memory of the living. He turns and walks slowly out of the room, ascending the stairs to his bedchamber for the last time. The guests remain at the table, stunned. They know they will not see him again. The fire in the dining room crackles, echoing the fire that consumed the manuscripts. The invisible hand is letting go. The architect of the modern world has finished his work. He has cleared his desk. He has said his goodbyes. Now he is ready to sleep. Upstairs, the room is dark. Smith lies in bed, listening to the wind. He is back in the solitude he started with. The fatherless boy from Kirkcaldy, the absent-minded professor, the tutor, the author, the commissioner. All the roles are falling away. All that remains is the man, Adam. And as he drifts towards the final silence, he is not thinking of markets or pins. He is thinking, perhaps, of his mother, who has gone before him. He is thinking of Hume. He is thinking that he has done his best to be lovely and worthy of love. The smoke from the chimney blends with the mist of the cannon gate. The city of Edinburgh, the city of the Enlightenment, sleeps below him. The manuscript is burned, but the light it cast will never go out. The stairwell of Panmure House is silent now. The guests have gone. The heavy door is bolted against the wind, and the only sound is the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds of a life that has measured the pulse of the world. It is July 17th, 1790. 2 days have passed since Smith bid his friends farewell. In the small, unadorned bedroom, the curtains are drawn to soften the summer light. Adam Smith is lying still. The struggle is over. The invisible hand that guided him through the bustling markets of Glasgow, the glittering salons of Paris, and the quiet corridors of the Custom House is now gently loosening its grip. He dies as he lived, quietly, without fuss, and with a profound sense of privacy. There are no last words recorded for the history books, no dramatic exhortations to the nation. He simply slips away, crossing the threshold from the world of matter to the world of memory. The father of economics leaves the economy of the living with a balance sheet that is perfectly clean. When the news of his death breaks the next morning, the reaction is strangely muted. This is a historical truth that often surprises us. Adam Smith did not die as a god. He died as a respected, but somewhat faded, public servant. The world's attention was elsewhere. Across the Channel, the French Revolution was roaring into its second violent year. The Bastille had fallen. The old order was crumbling in a storm of fire and blood. The newspapers were full of riots, speeches, and the movements of armies. In the midst of this deafening political thunder, the passing of a quiet Scottish philosopher seemed like a minor note. The Times of London gave him a meagre obituary, noticing his death with a polite nod rather than a weeping nation. But Smith would have preferred it this way. He hated the mob. He hated the noise of fame. He had always argued that the man of virtue seeks the approval of his own conscience, not the applause of the crowd. A few days later, a small procession winds its way down the Royal Mile to the Canongate Kirkyard. It is a short walk from his house. The mourners are few, mostly his close friends, the men from the Sunday suppers, who knew him not as a statue, but as the man who loved sugar and forgot his hat. They lower him into the earth, just a few steps from the bustling street where the merchants he championed are selling their wares. The grave is marked by a simple stone. The inscription is modest. Here are deposited the remains of Adam Smith, author of The Theory of Moral Sentiments and Wealth of Nations. That is all. No titles, no honors, no flowery verse. Just the work. But after the earth is settled, a secret comes to light, a final plot twist in the story of the prophet of self-interest. When his will is read and his estate is calculated, his friends are confused. Smith had earned a fortune in his life. He had his professor's fees, his massive pension from the Duke, his salary from the Customs House, and the royalties from his best-selling books. He lived simply, spent little on clothes, and didn't gamble. Everyone expected him to leave a mountain of gold. But the money is gone. The estate is surprisingly small. Where did it go? Had he made bad investments? Had he been robbed? Slowly, the truth emerges. For years, quietly, secretly, Adam Smith had been giving his money away. He had been donating large sums to the poor of Edinburgh, to struggling families, to widows and orphans. But he had done it with a strict condition. No one was allowed to know. He covered his tracks. He practiced an invisible charity to match his invisible hand. This revelation completely upends the caricature of Smith as the champion of greed, the man who wrote that "it is not from the benevolence of the butcher that we expect our dinner," was, in his private life, overwhelmingly benevolent. He lived by the code of his first book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. He believed that true virtue is acting properly when no one is watching. He gave not for the reputation of being generous, but for the sheer propriety of the act. He was helping the forgotten man, not with economic theories, but with actual bread and coal. There is a profound beauty in this final image. We see the philosopher of capitalism dying with empty pockets because he filled the pockets of others. It reconciles the two halves of his soul. He taught us how to create wealth, but he showed us how to use it. He showed that the ultimate purpose of accumulation is not hoarding, but humanity. As the weeks pass, the shock of his death fades, and the stone in the Canongate kirkyard begins to weather in the Scottish rain. The books in his library are packed up and sold. The house is quiet, but out in the world, the machine he described is gathering speed. The steam engines are pumping in the mines. The ships are crossing the Atlantic. The pin factories are humming. The politicians in London are debating his ideas in Parliament. The system of natural liberty is beginning to dismantle the old feudal world, brick by brick. Smith is gone, but he is everywhere. He is in the shopkeeper opening his shutters. He is in the contract signed between strangers. He is in the very idea that ordinary people, left to their own devices, can create a prosperous world. The quiet man has stopped speaking, but the conversation he started will never end. The stone in the Canongate kirkyard stands silent under the moss and the rain, but the ideas of the man buried beneath it have escaped the grave. They have taken on a life that Adam Smith, in his most ambitious dreams, could scarcely have imagined. We drift now, in this final chapter, away from the 18th century, floating upward to look at the long luminous tail of the comet he set in motion. We are looking at the echo of the invisible. In the decades following his death, the world changed with a ferocity that defied belief. The steam engines that Smith saw as novelties became the roaring hearts of locomotives tearing across continents. The pin factories grew into sprawling complexes of steel and glass. The universal opulence he predicted began to trickle down unevenly but undeniably, raising standards of living from the mud of the feudal age to the heights of the modern era. Historians call this the Great Enrichment, the sudden vertical takeoff of human prosperity after thousands of years of stagnation. And at the center of this explosion, acting as its operating system, was the book written by the quiet recluse of Kirkcaldy. But as Smith's name traveled the globe, his true self began to fragment. He became a myth, a symbol, a weapon. In the smoky debating clubs of London and the marble halls of Washington, he was hailed as the apostle of capitalism. Men who had never read The Theory of Moral Sentiments quoted The Wealth of Nations to justify things Smith would have despised. Factory owners used his arguments against government interference to block laws stopping child labor, forgetting that Smith championed the dignity and education of the poor. Robber barons used the invisible hand as a shield for their monopolies, ignoring Smith's fierce warnings that businessmen always conspire to raise prices. This is the great tragedy and the great irony of his legacy. The man who burned his own shirts to avoid smuggling, the man who gave his fortune to the poor in secret, was caricatured as the patron saint of greed. The Adam Smith problem, we touched upon earlier, became a problem of memory. The world remembered the wallet but forgot the heart. It remembered the prices but forgot the sympathy. Yet, if we listen closely to the echo, the true Smith is still there. He is waiting for us to read him again, not as a fanatic, but as a philosopher. He reminds us that the market is not a jungle, it is a society. He reminds us that commerce is not just about making money. It is about making life bearable for the stranger. Every time you buy a coffee from a grower you will never meet, every time you click a button and a package arrives from across the ocean, you are participating in the vast, cooperative miracle that Smith described. You are proving that we can help each other without knowing each other. There is a scholarly debate that serves as a beautiful final note to his intellectual journey. Some modern thinkers argue that Smith was actually the last of the ancient moralists, not the first of the modern economists. They say he wasn't trying to invent a new science of numbers. He was trying to figure out how to be a good person in a commercial world. He was asking, how do we stay virtuous when we are busy getting rich? It is a question that hangs over us tonight in our world of smartphones and instant delivery, just as heavily as it hung over the tobacco lords of Glasgow. Smith's answer, echoing from the grave, is balance. We need the invisible hand to fill our bellies, but we need the impartial spectator to guide our souls. We need the freedom to trade, but we need the wisdom to care. He trusted us. He believed that ordinary people, left to their own devices, are generally decent, generally hardworking, and generally kind. He didn't think we needed a king to tell us how to live. He thought we could figure it out together. As the camera pulls back further, the details of the 18th century fade. The wigs, the coaches, the candlelight, they dissolve into the flow of time. But the figure of Adam Smith remains. We see him walking the streets of eternity, his cane on his shoulder, his head cocked to the side, smiling at the bustling, noisy, chaotic, wonderful world he helped to unshackle. He is not judging us. He is observing us. He is watching the vast, complex dance of billions of people trading and talking and trying to improve their lot. And he is nodding. It is working. It is messy. It is imperfect. It is sometimes cruel, but it is working. The pin factory is still running. And so, we return to where we began, to the silence of the study. The fire is out. The desk is empty. The great book is written. The quiet man has said his piece. He has explained the world, not to rule it, but to free it. He has shown us that the source of our wealth is not gold, but each other. He has left us with a legacy that is not made of stone or bronze, but of possibility. The story of Adam Smith is the story of a mind that woke up. It is the story of a man who looked at the chaos of human life and saw a hidden order. It is a story that tells us that beneath the noise, there is a harmony. Beneath the selfishness, there is cooperation. Beneath the visible confusion, there is an invisible hand holding us all together. The library door closes with a soft, heavy click. The dust settles on the leather spines of the books. The candle we lit at the beginning of our journey has burned down to a pool of wax, its flame flickering one last time before vanishing into a ribbon of sweet-smelling smoke. The city of Edinburgh, the pin factories, the ships on the Clyde, and the voice of the philosopher. They all drift away now, receding into the velvet fog of history. You are no longer in the 18th century. You're here, safe, in the quiet of your own time. The world of markets and noise is far away. There is nothing left to analyze. There is nothing left to trade. The ledger is closed. Adam Smith has done his work, and now you must do yours. Your work is to rest. Your work is to let go. Just as the invisible hand guides the world without effort, let sleep guide you now without effort. Trust the darkness. It is not empty. It is full of peace. Let your breathing slow down. Let your thoughts turn into smoke. The quiet man is watching over the silence. The history is finished. The night has begun. Sweet dreams.